Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if neglected Naruto genetic memory chunin exams. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by MattyNoNecro, link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1, Too Good for Your Own Good. He was ready, the act prepared. So Kyoshi-kun, how have the new academy class settled into their first day? He had seen this face quite often over the years, but never did it look so forced and rugged, like it had been broken and hastily repaired. The owner of said face was Kyoshi Matsu. Troubled would be a good way to describe him, and he had a fair idea of what caused it. That being said, it was best to be discreet when talking to a fellow elderly shinobi. Letting out a sigh, Kyoshi removed the metaphorical mask before sitting down. It was customary to ask his Hokage for a seat, but after what he'd just been through, he really didn't care. He was just an average guy with an average build. He had the standard dull brown hair of Konoha, and just to rub his individuality in a little, he inherited brown eyes too. In fact, the only thing that he kind of liked about his appearance was the nifty battle scar just above his left eye. Sadly, he got this from a training accident. As if to show the world he accepted his bland appearance, he brushed it off lightly with the standard Konoha chunin uniform. What in Kami's name did I do to deserve a day like today? Giving his throat a sound clearing, the Hokage simply lifted his pipe and lit it with a wordless jutsu. Looking up to see the somewhat down form of Kyoshi, he thought it best to get started. Every day each year you come in looking something like you do now. No one word could describe his unfortunate predicament. Every year I then ask what's wrong. After this is done, you always proceed to explain everything that went wrong that day and how the new students misbehaved. I then spend a large portion of my evening consoling you, supporting you, and ultimately giving you the confidence to look past all of this and persevere for their sake. At the end of the year you are relieved and happy only for the process to repeat within the next few weeks. The reason I'm telling you this is that by the look of your face, I don't think that will be enough. All he received in return was a slow shake of the head. It wasn't like Kyoshi was ever one for complaining. In fact, he was one of his hardest working and longest serving ninja, truly wanting the best for every student he taught. However, sometimes there was a limit to how much one man could take. With another puff of his pipe, he then rested it in between his interlocked fingers before giving the command, "Okay old friend, explain." He really wasn't looking forward to this. He took a few drawn-out breaths, trying to find the right words to what exactly just happened. He'd never encountered such bad behavior before. Well, it started out like a pretty standard opening day, to be honest. Everyone got a tour of the academy and were shown their lockers, while my assistant Iruka prepared the classroom. By this point I was pretty happy. Although a little nervous with the amount of clan airs, it was going smoothly. That was until that boy showed up late. I was annoyed at first and gave him a quick scolding off, but he didn't seem to really care too much, so I made an effort on watching him. You know what they're like. By this point we had everything done and on good time, so we headed back to class. That's when things got a little worse. He grimaced, just thinking about later events that happened in that classroom. As usual, my opening speech about what we'll be learning and doing grabbed the attention of all the academy students. Even this year's Nara was very intrigued and didn't look slightly bored. But that boy fell asleep. He even had the gall to start yawning. This was quite a surprise to him and, by the looks of it, the Hokage too. Nobody fell asleep during the academy opening speech. Every kid present had been anticipating this day for the majority of their lives. In their eyes, it was the start of a ninja fantasy world. To fall asleep during the speech was like falling asleep during your dream come true. Now I'm not too used to children falling asleep during my speech, so I didn't really know what to do. I called his name and he didn't respond. I then shouted. No response. As I'm sure you can imagine, I was getting a little worked up at this point, and my climactic speech was all but ruined because of the brat, so I simply decided to finish it and deal with him after. The Hokage could only let out a sigh. Kyoshi prolonged everything. Please, just tell me the basics. Maybe this boy was just feeling a little tired, cranky perhaps. Just list off what he managed to do in one day. It couldn't be that bad, right? Wrong. Kyoshi wasted no time. He refused to move seats when asked. He provoked other students, particularly Sasuke-cha. When asking students questions, he answered before they got a chance. I'm nearly sure he knocked out the Hyuga heiress. He often referred to Shino Aburam as bug fetish. When he asked to go to the toilet, he didn't come back for over an hour. When asked why, he gave me an in-depth detailed report on his restroom break and how he had created something called Chithulu. By this point the Hokage and Kyoshi were going red, one through holding in laughter and the other by short breath. Thankfully lunch came and passed without much of an incident. After lunch he had seemed to quieten down a little during shinobi history, but as soon as chakra theory started he went to sleep. It was at this point he committed yet another act, even with a warning that I would put him into detention. Once he ended, it was clear the man was on the verge of tears. He had a bad day all because of the brat. He would refuse to teach it. The Hokage finally let a gentle smile grace his face. "I suppose you want me to go and speak to him?" Kyoshi vigorously nodded his head. "Yes, Hokage-sama. Please, if I may ask, would you excuse him from the regime or make him wait another year so he learns his lesson? I don't know if I can take another day of that." He had a fair idea of who he was talking about, he also had to get the full story from the boy himself. "We'll see, Kyoshi-kun. But you know what Naruto's like. He's probably got about 50 different backup plans to get himself out of trouble." "Haha, that old geezer is such a fool, he thought I wouldn't be prepared for something as traditional as this." To anyone else the boy would have looked insane, after all, he was standing in a classroom alone seemingly talking to no one. Naruto was a smart kid, very smart. He knew that he would probably press a few buttons on his first day by simply being there, so of course he came prepared. Slinging his bright orange and black school bag off his back, he set it on the floor before pulling out what appeared to be a simple wooden stick. All along its frame were small holes that he had crafted to be the perfect size for holding a pen. Opening it up to full length, it was at least a meter long. "I knew it was a good idea to bring you, lines were an obvious one, but to think I got it in the first day, oh well." By his facial expression it was clear he simply didn't care. Why would he? Continuing his scheme, he maneuvered around the classroom, opening everyone's desks, taking the required gear he needed. By required gear it was all of Sasuke's spare pens and the odd one from Ino for safekeeping. These things aren't cheap after all. Popping them into the different holes, he then held the stick vertically along the board before slowing writing his mistake so that he would remember not to do it again. The middle finger is not a ninja hand sign. They're all done. Taking a few steps back, he wiped his brow in a satisfied fake sweat. He had just filled an entire standard-sized academy board in the space of a few minutes. It was supposed to take him hours. "Naruto, I expected better from you, but I can't say I'm surprised." The stern yet amused voice was a familiar one. It was also one that his mind had learned to associate with punishment. Jumping at the unexpected voice, his head slowly turned around in a comical fashion. Haha, it's not what it looked like, old man. I was just, practicing a technique." His voice was strained and obviously forced to make himself seem incognito. Trying to buy himself some time, he took in the appearance of the third Hokage. Although it was fairly normal for a Sarutobi, bar the big smoking guy that is. The third Hokage was fairly small in stature, however that didn't deter from the powerful presence he seemed to exude. With tanned skin and gray spiked hair, it was evident he was in the elder years of his life. Accompanying this look was a small goatee. Another testimony to his old age was his gaunt and wrinkled face. One look and you would know the man was under pressure, but that didn't stop his face always falling into a warm smile. Shaking his head, the old man would simply have interrupted, but what stopped him was the one simple fact: it was Naruto. The kid, although incredibly lazy and unpredictable, was a natural genius. If there was a way to get out of trouble, whether that be lying, slandering or really anything, he would do it. "Well, Naruto, what is this marvelous technique and what does it do, pray tell?" As if the clogs in his brain started turning, his face provided the visual representation, this being his face turning from frightened into a big shit-eating grin. "I can indeed provide this information." He was Naruto Uzumaki, being admittedly overconfident may have been one of his flaws, but why not? He had yet to unsuccessfully bullshit himself out of these sorts of instances. He gleefully paced across the room, scratching the back of his head as he did. "You see, old man, it's a secret. Plus if I told you, then you wouldn't believe it." Without a second spared, the Kage let out a low chuckle before questioning for some elaboration. "Oh, and why's that?" If Naruto could describe himself in one word, it would be an oddball. Self-admittedly, he was anything but normal, and he was fine with that. In his mind, being unique and different was the best, however it did come with its downsides. He didn't really have many friends, not because he didn't want them, more along the lines of they didn't want him. Yes, he was a prick most of the time, but in his mind they deserved it. Due to this isolation, a reluctance to be loved formed. He didn't have time for that friendship crap, especially the way the villagers treated him. He just liked causing havoc with the occasional little tad of understandable evil mixed in. On top of this, he was a realistic kid. Somewhere deep down there was a well-mannered, adorable boy that longed for friendship and love. Sadly, growing up on his own knocked that kid down a peg or two. Add on his stressful responsibilities at a young age, little to no support, not to mention the majority of a village calling you a demon. Yeah, he turned out pretty damn fine, all things considered. That's what brought him here, standing in front of the Hokage because of his attention-seeking ways and relishing in that few seconds that he was the center of attention. What did it get him? The bad reputation with his academy instructor, a terrible one with the majority of his classmates, in addition to putting even more of a target on his back. No doubt his posh and prestigious clan heir classmates would go home and tell their parents of their day, and that's why he was smiling so wickedly. He really didn't give a damn. Translation. Yes, he really did not give a damn. Not about that stuff anyway. Pushing these thoughts to the back of his mind, he hopped up onto one of the student desks, moving around until he got comfortable. He then rested his hands behind him and leaned back. "Well, I was thinking about that thing you told me the fourth Hokage did, you know, the way he could make all this freaky stuff and flash about the place." "Yes. I believe you're referring to Fuinjutsu." As if on cue, the little devil clicked his heels in realization before giving the table a small thump. Something about the action seemed practiced, as if he had prepared a response for his statement. He duly noted another one of Naruto's traits, this being that he was very hard on himself. "That's it, Fuinjutsu. Well, anyways, I was thinking about what you told me about needing really good writing skills for it, so I created this thing." He again withdrew his stick. "If you notice, every letter in every word is the exact same width and height. They're exact copies. Writing with this thing is faster, plus it influences my handwriting to be similar, unbiased and in a sense correct to its own laws. In a sense it minimizes anomalies." Damn. His 8-year-old brain cogs really had to work for that sentence. Seeing where this was going, the old cage could only chuckle before finishing the explanation for him. "I see, so you're carefully drawing multiple words and sentences at a time at a very slow pace. This requires a steady hand, and in return will grant you one through practice and use. So hypothetically, you'll be able to perfect your handwriting at a much faster pace. Very impressive, Naruto-kun. Although I'm a little surprised at this, to be honest, you're usually quite lazy and wouldn't go out of your way to do something as strenuous as this." The whole way through the cage's analysis his head was held high. "Oh, I do love basking in my greatness." Then came the last bit. Lazy. "I wouldn't call painting the entire Hokage monument lazy, old man. I'll do it again if I hear any more of that." He waited a few moments before he finished in a small laugh when he saw his cage's reaction. "Don't worry, I'm only kidding. Besides, that prank cost way too much money." The cage sweat dropped in relief. He remembered all too well what Naruto did last time, and it would be something remembered for generations. As one would suspect through the topic of their conversation, he painted the monument orange. There was far more to it than that though. It was fluorescent orange, it just happened to be chakra-laced, so no amount of jutsu or water would take it down. Then there was the finisher to the onslaught. Naruto had set up the prank to happen the day of the chunin exams, the time when Konoha had to put on a strong front and look like a paradise on earth. Naruto made sure that no matter where you were in the village, a giant blob of orange was in your vision. The amount of complaints he received caused a few sleepless nights. Naruto burst into laughter at seeing the comical rain cloud atop the poor cage's head. That paint really must have been a bitch to get off, huh? At that the cage's face immediately fell into a scowl. Naruto held both hands over his mouth, realizing his mistake. Never curse in front of the old man. He'd received many a warning for his foul mouth, but damn it wasn't his fault. Cursing had all but turned into a verbal tic years ago. "Naruto, what have I told you about swearing?" The boy knew about every profane word in their language, and he was pretty sure the kid invented some new ones too. Naruto slowly got up from his seat before going to grab his bag. "Well, maybe if the village provided a better apartment and maybe even in a better area, I wouldn't have had to grow up hearing it, then my young easily guided mind wouldn't have considered it normal." Heading over to the window, he opened it before hopping up on the sill. He had figured out a good way to escape punishment was to guilt trip the old man, and besides it was time he got going before the old man remembered to punish him. Looking back over his shoulder he muttered, "But as you know, I don't have anybody willing to do that." He knew it was a move, then again, it was also true. While he and the cage had close bonds, they never developed anything more than that, in his opinion anyway. He was treated like a grandson by the man, that didn't mean he treated him as his granddad. Why would he? He was lucky to see the man once or twice in a month due to his heavy workload, and apart from that he was on his own. Being as experienced as he was, he knew Naruto was in deep thought. Seeing the blonde's face slowly turn into a scowl confirmed that. Naruto's thoughts were never happy. Opening his mouth to say something, he was silenced by the blonde deciding to take his leave and leaping out of the building. He could only let out a sigh at his wild nature. "Ah, Naruto, what will I do with you? It's clear you don't have any friends, and it's apparent that you don't want any either." To say he was worried was an understatement. He knew how much good friends mattered, how a friend could pull you up when things were down. He shook his head for what felt like the 100th time today, standing to his full height, which wasn't that much. He gave his back a small stretch. "It's time to get back to work now that Naruto's been dealt with. Let's see, what do I have to do? Permission slips, check. Ranking new missions, check. Now what else? I forgot to give him the warning from Kiyoshi." The little devil had played him like a fool again. With his school bag over one shoulder and a wicked smile plastered back onto his face, Naruto was running as fast as his little legs could carry him. Racing down the streets and alleyways, he kept his eyes peeled for any genin. After all, he needed a few kunai for practicing, and they were pretty damn expensive. Pulling into the market district, he came to an abrupt halt when he saw a genin squad entering an alleyway, obviously taking a shortcut to the tower. It was always so simple to tell too, a genin would parade around showing off their forehead protectors, and their casual demeanor was so much more natural. The chunin or jonin had experience and lived the life of a ninja, walking around the village and living a normal life was only something they did in their spare time, thus it was easy to differentiate their demeanor. This was usually how he figured it out, this time however it was pretty simple, they were carrying a cat, if he remembered correctly, Tor the demon cat, haha, dead giveaway. The temperamental grunts and occasional hisses of pain coming from the group backed up his theory. Taking into account that there was no Jonin sensei, probably due to slacking off, Naruto hunched down on the ground behind a few stray boxes before his hand flew back into the open rucksack. Not 30 seconds had passed when he had pulled out ink, paper and a brush before drawing a seal, and with a silent whisper of Kami I love Fuinjutsu, he was ready to go. That was another thing, he was very skilled in Fuinjutsu, not that he'd let the old man know that. The cage had recently let slip a little knowledge to him about Fuinjutsu. He remembered fondly at the memories when he inquired only to be given these words, Naruto. Whatever you do, don't get involved in Fuinjutsu. You're too young, too reckless and without a sensei with years of training it would be lunacy. He remembered that brief stop, accompanied by a stern piercing gaze and a bang of his fist against his office table. He had never seen the Sarutobi this angry and was all but sure to forget about the art until a later, more suitable date. That's when he finished his speech, I know you never listen to me, or anyone for that matter. But if you ever take one piece of advice let it be this, do not attempt Fuinjutsu. One minor mistake and a simple ceiling tag could cause a big enough explosion to wipe out an entire home. And that's where the cage messed up, something that awesome just had to be explored, and he did. A few trips to the library, albeit sneaky, unseen trips, and he bagged himself a few beginner books on the art, along with a fancy new instruction manual by somebody called Jiraiya. A little research later thanks to his history books, and he knew everything about the owner of that name. Sensei of the Fourth, one of the legendary Sannin, holder of the frog summoning contract and an expert in Fuinjutsu. As far as he was concerned the man's books left him in pretty decent hands. His mind snapped back to his task. You may have done this before, but that doesn't mean you should take it lightly. Sneaking up on Genin was very challenging. He had to focus. He snuck out from behind the box ready to attack his prey. Although he was well hidden and moving with little to no sound, anyone able to see him would be intrigued at what they saw. Gone was the wicked smile and playful eyes, instead there was a scowl etched on his face accompanied by dead azure eyes. Naruto was unaware of this. If anything, its cause was natural rather than forced. Letting out slow calming breaths Naruto gave himself a go-ahead, okay, you know the drill. Slowly but surely he crept along the side of the alley, using the cover of shop stalls and other objects, such as trash cans to hide his presence. Coming into range of the slacking Genin he gave a quick dart forward and with sleight of hand that could only be gained through experience, Naruto reached into the Genin's back pouch before withdrawing well over a dozen kunai. He moved back and they were placed into his bag with fluid efficiency. He stayed close but remained silent, waiting for another time to strike. Hey Slowpoke, come over here and take this thing, I've gotten enough cuts from it already. It appears luck was in his side. It was standard for a Genin group to use formations, while in the village and little to no danger, it was a great team-building exercise that also taught squads the basics of working together in formation, thus the Genin had swapped places in order to protect the package. That's what he assumed anyway. Like last time he waited for them to fall into place as no mishaps would occur. He repeated the process. He let loose a smirk, he managed to get another dozen or so kunai along with at least 5 shuriken, it was a good haul. This amount would do him for at least a month, considering he could keep reusing them until they eventually got worn out. Turning around he was about to leave, he was more than happy with his loot, and then there it was, the corner of his eye just had to pick up the sweet image that would have him set for months. The only problem was that it lead the pack in their single file formation. It would be tough to get to without alerting his victims. He took in everything about the target. An average height but a strong build, also a little on the heavy side, so he'll hit like a bull, but be as slow as a slug, probably an Akimichi perfect. He couldn't help but let a wicked grin loose before it slid back into a scowl. His eyes darted to his target of admiration. It was an Academy standard issue of a training sack, packed to the brim and bulging every time his target thudded the ground with heavy feet. Although it itself was made of dirt cheap material, what it held was of value. Not uncommon for Genin to have, the real surprise was that it was present. Usually they were an object just to place a mass amount of weapons into, definitely not to be carried around, especially while on missions. I can't believe Sensei made you carry his rucksack while he prepares the training ground. He could have at least brought it with him. His eyes gleamed at information unknowingly let loose by the unsuspecting Genin, his wicked smile returned, this time sting. If the rucksack belonged to a Jonin sensei it had to have had more than kunai and shuriken. The Akimichi kicked a stray stone out of frustration, well I guess that's what I get for talking back, right? At least his lazy ass won't be able to complain about carrying the bag, besides I don't want him any angrier at me than he already is. This really isn't your lucky day, pal. Although he didn't altogether agree with what he was doing, he shoved that to the back of his mind to be forgotten. It was the village's fault at the end of the day. He was in the academy, he was expected to train and practice at throwing shuriken and kunai. How was he meant to do so with none? The little money he got each month was spent on rent, food and when he had spare, clothes. If he was left with any, which was rare, it was put away in a jar to be saved for a rainy day. So far that jar wouldn't even hold enough for one kunai, let alone a set. Damn monument stunt. He never was one for plans. He was a hybrid. He loved stealth, it was natural to him, but when he was caught or needed to reveal himself, he didn't do so with a formulated plan that would be executed to the second, he just went in and unleashed hell. Well, that's what he would do if he could. At least I'll get an A for effort. But that thought he sprung forward as fast as his legs could carry him, all effort for stealth forgotten. Approaching the single-line formation, he tapped the closest one's shoulder causing him to look away, he then gave a loud shout of "sorry," which caused the middle one to turn around into his closed fist. He didn't have enough strength to do any real damage, but with momentum it was enough to knock him to the ground. He didn't have to call for his next target's attention though. The panic scream of his previous genin victim followed by a hissing cat, no doubt being dropped provided that. His childish gleeful laughter probably helped a little too. Not slowing down in the slightest, he continued forward, and like the little gremlin he was, he pounced onto the startled Akimichi feet first, successfully knocking him to the ground before landing on him, using his full body weight to straddle his waist, was the only way to keep the giant pinned. He didn't have a hope of outmuscling an Akimichi, especially not one that was double his height and probably triple his weight. That's where his speciality came in, his backup if you will. With the permanent grin still on his face, he made direct eye contact, giving a cheesy wink. He placed his trump card directly onto his forehead before running on. All of this was done in a few seconds. Haha, gotta love a flashbang. Who knew Fuinjutsu would come in so handy? If one was looking from afar, the entire incident would have been comical. Something about seeing a pint-sized kid knock over two genin double his height just didn't seem right, add on the big cheesy grin, and it looked plain wrong, physics shouldn't allow it. Running from the team, Naruto could be seen carrying in front of him a huge rucksack that was easily his size, if not a little more. That didn't stop him from laughing maniacally. Looking behind, while still moving, he saw two figures groggily get to their feet and one still standing with mouth agape through the thin cloud of smoke. Oh crap. There wasn't supposed to be any smoke in that seal, guess I must have messed up the pattern or something. Oh well. At least it didn't blow up. Heaving pants and ragged breaths were the sound echoing through his barren apartment. Gah, to think the fat one was so fast. It had been going pretty well up until he looked behind him a few minutes later. Thinking about that sent a shiver down his spine. Something about seeing a young yet developed Akimichi ninja running after him like a raging rhinoceros really freaked him out. You know, shit just got real when somebody ninja runs. He normally just ran with his arms flailing at the side, but this guy had the technique on point. Now he was pretty fast for his age, but the fact that he had to carry a rucksack full to the brim with tools really slowed him down. Add on the fact he decided to shout back at him that his chaser was fat probably didn't help. He managed to evade the charging behemoth by dipping in and out of crowded areas, running through large groups, and he even ran through a corner sidebar to avoid the kid, not that all that did much either. He stood straight and put on a face the old Sarutobi would often do when recalling fond stories, but alas, the chase ended. He was getting pretty good at his elderly impressions. The boy was on a mission to get that rucksack back and probably cripple him with all the trash talking he was doing. That all ended, however, when he came to a small pond outside a play park. At the time the kid was close to touching him and he was all but caught. That's when he decided to change things up a little and put his unpredictable mind to use. He jumped into the puddle, splashing up water everywhere around him, effectively drenching his victim. It didn't stop there though. His unexpected, unorthodox action caused the boy to fall in said puddle, and when he saw it, he couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't like before. He actually had to stop, set the bag down before laughing hysterically. It was that bad. Of course this made the raging rhino way angrier, if that was possible. Again, it didn't help when he compared his appearance to that of a sunbathing walrus. That seemed to be the final straw for the kid. He had been pushed over the limit, he was tired and he had been humiliated. The anger left, as did the adrenaline, and instead of chasing the blonde he gave up, deciding instead to bask in his own defeat. Oh how I do love happy endings. Not for the Akimichi of course, but for him. Not everyone could be a winner after all. Looking around his rundown apartment, his adrenaline-fueled smile slowly slid off his face. He lived in a dump, literally. And like that his mood changed from ecstatic to the right opposite. It was normal when he was at home or nobody was around to see. His front door led directly into the kitchen, living area combo, which was the shape of an L. When entering there was an old brass coat stand to the left that had a few goofy hats and masks, and to the right a standard plastic bin. Then there was a row of counters made up of an oven, washing machine and clothes dryer, all of which were broken. You would then come to the back wall where a simple counter for chopping and preparing meals stood. You could tell it was used due to the amount of scratches, scrapes and burn marks littered from place to place. From the back heading to the right was a fridge, and beside it was a freezer. The former was faulty, often leaving food unusable, and the latter just straight up didn't work. All of this was fitted into the long part of the L with old TV, faded cloth couch and a bookshelf accompanying the empty wall. That was the one thing he took pride in, his bookshelf. It was packed, meaning it could hold no more. All of which was different accounts, recollections and viewpoints on shinobi and world history. He loved history. He loved history's people even more. He had information on the founding of Kumo to the appointment of the Yondaime Hokage. He even had detailed accounts of the Third Great Ninja War from multiple viewpoints. Konoha's being the easiest to get and Iwa's being the hardest. Nevertheless he managed to scrape together a pretty damn good collection all things considered. Making his way over to his bedroom door with a rucksack slung over his shoulder he opened the door, threw the sack in the empty corner before falling onto the bed, haggard breath still echoing. He had abnormally good stamina for his age, and all things considered, he was beat. That rucksack is just too damn heavy. He wanted to check his spoils of war, however that would have to wait. He was exhausted. Surrounding him was a barren room. By barren it was empty bar the single bed he was lying on and a wardrobe that looked like it was about to fall apart. There was a small window and a back door along the far wall, which led to a small balcony which actually had a pretty nice view. That being said, the rates and tax he paid because of that view nearly doubled his overall payment each month. Damn council and their stupid laws. But fatigue quickly fading, he rolled over to his side and picked up the nearest magazine. He glanced at the front cover before reading aloud, Never-Ending Fantasy VII Remake, awesome. Because the game had come out ages ago he had played it quite often, in fact he owned the original as he was able to pick up a copy and the old console for it at a charity shop. The downside, and there always was one, happened to be that the thing packed in and broke a few weeks later. He took in the appearance of the guy standing in the front cover, Cloud Strife. I swear that guy looks exactly like me, only older. That's so freaky. He flicked the page before he let his obsession take a hold of him. Maybe in like 20 years when the game and the current console were cheap he could play it. He continued his reading, each page making him slightly more depressed before he got to the real killer, Blackout 4, and now available for the X-Crate 1 and the Playtable 4. Doesn't look too bad, post-apocalyptic. Now he was really kidding himself. He wanted that game so much, not that he would admit that. He continued, eyes traveling to a review, rated 8.6 by him, just the right amount of water, very moist with bang. He hated him, damn money whoring bastards. With that the magazine got thrown to the back of the room. If you don't know where to put it, shove it in the back. He let out a giggle at the double meaning. Being raised in the area that he was came with a very imaginative mind. That was the simple way to put it anyway. Although he didn't have much of an interest in newer games such as the ones he was reading, he didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. He could never afford a console anyway, but he didn't care. I have other ways to amuse myself. Translation. When he wasn't training, sleeping or pissing people off he kept himself company. He looked around the barren room, his motivated smile dropping like it did before. Okay, now I'm just pulling my wire. I've got nothing. Shut up, brat. What did I tell you about talking to yourself? And that was his ever so thoughtful and loving landlord who just happened to live in the apartment next door. Hate was a very strong word, but he hated his landlord. He refused to fix anything, not to mention verbally abusing him like he had just done. Hell, he was just trying to keep himself some company, and that was the reaction to it, fucking asshole. He really wanted to tell his landlord where to put it, he wanted to burn this very apartment to the ground and any others the man owned just to spite him, but when reality kicked in he just couldn't. He needed this place to live, and he doubted anyone else in the village would allow him to rent an apartment for price he was currently paying. All he knew was that when he was rolling in the dosh this place was getting burned to the ground and he was building a mansion on its ashes. Giving his legs a few kicks he could feel the stiffness leave them, he had nothing better to do so he might as well be productive. Shaking his head, the deep scowl on his face was replaced by the usual when at home. A small frown. Getting up he walked over to his newly acquired gear, his chin-length bangs and spiky mop bouncing as he went. Just as he was about to reach down there was a knock at the door. Only one person ever knocked on the door. Oh crap, I thought I tricked you earlier. Now he was in real trouble, he internally prayed the cage didn't know about his collecting of certain resources. He glanced at the rucksack before nudging it further into the corner. By his voice you could tell he wasn't happy. You did, but I remembered shortly afterwards. He wiped off the thin sheet of sweat on his brow, thankful he had dodged the main bullet. Okay, cool. There was a minute's silence. Are you going to let me in? He responded in a perfectly normal voice, no. Just as he was about to kick open the door in a rare moment of rage that only a certain blonde could bring out, the door was swung open by said blonde. He took in the rather strange appearance that was quite different than what it was 30 minutes ago. The somewhat weird, spiky blonde hair with Uzumaki red tips was the usual, no surprises there. For some reason Naruto's hair always held, and it had to be the weirdest, most unnatural hold of all. He had 2 chin-length bangs framing either side of his face, this was normal. The rest wasn't. On top of this he had a spiky mop of hair that looked uncontrolled and wild, yet tame at the same time, like it was following a pattern. These multitudes of spikes continued back in the shape similar of a certain Uchiha Academy student and strangely reminded him of that fictional character everyone talked about. Although he had red tips at the end of each hair, it was less apparent at the shorter sides. The dazzling azure eyes were the same, obviously, and so was the blank look verging on a scowl that he always held when annoyed. What was different was the amount of dirt that was on him. He was wearing the usual black long-sleeve top that was quite tight-fitting, as well as a pair of originally white, now light gray shorts finished with a pair of black sandals, however the kid was plastered in dirt like he bathed in it. Before he could say anything the blonde cut in, "I'm dirty because I was training." Technically he wasn't lying. "I was about to get a shower, but then you came. I assume this is why you wouldn't let me in." The voice was stern. He scratched the back of his head, not even trying to mask the lie, "Yeah, sure." They stood in silence for a few moments, it was clear he didn't get visitors often. Do you want to come in?" Receiving a nod he stood aside letting the cage walk into his rundown apartment. He had made sure to close the door to his bedroom, so at least his loot was safe. Now all he had to do was play it smart and he'd have the old man on his way so he could get to business. Walking in after the Saratobi Naruto followed him to the couch, instead of sitting beside him on the couch like he had asked, he chose to lean against the near wall. He had only just entered the apartment when he let off yet another sigh. The first was caused by the state of Naruto's home, the next was by Naruto's attitude, or lack of attitude. He knew the kid didn't resent him, he just didn't know the proper way to treat a guest, or a friend for that matter. The conditions he lived in weren't good, but he could afford to give him any more money, the village council were on his back enough, and even though he would gladly spare money from his own account, he couldn't be seen as biased to one orphan over the many others. He could do this if he could afford to give equal money to them all, but even Akage's wage couldn't afford to fuel orphans from a military-based village. Not after the Third Ninja War and the Kyuubi attack. Not even close. Although that wouldn't stop him from having a stern talking to the landlord, the broken things would at least be getting fixed, that's for sure. After looking down at his feet in internal shame he looked up at the sun-kissed blonde who was locking eyes with him, clear boredom etched on his face. "Now Naruto, I'm sure you know why I'm here." The voice he used was stern, but it held a tone that had a hint of guilt. He didn't like shouting at the kid, especially because he had no right to. Naruto picked up on the guilt. He ignored it, after a few years he was well aware of the cage's techniques, or trying to make things sound better than what they actually were, whatever helps him get to sleep at night. Responding he stated simply, "I am aware. But I damn well don't deserve to be." He was usually a lot more cheery than this, he liked to pick at people, have a little fun, and now that he thought about it, he was the damn king of sarcasm. But what happened today really pissed him off. The cage repeated his words from earlier in the day with a little extra. "Pray tell, and this time, be truthful." When he finished the sentence he at least expected some sort of involuntary response, like a widening of eyes at his more serious tone, or maybe even a shiver as a sign of nerves, but Naruto took after his father that way, he was just naturally oblivious to what would affect others. Naruto pushed himself off the wall and started pacing across the room. "Oh, I'll tell you what happened, and that prick you call a teacher better be gone by the end of the week." It was the first time in a while he had let something work him up or get him frustrated, but he didn't struggle through life to get another tough run. As soon as things were supposed to get good, he would at least get treated close to equal. That wrinkly turd, the one with the tree up his ass and looked like he was about to break down the majority of the day. "He put you up to this?" He received a nod. "Fucking asshole, when I see him I'm so gonna shove a kunai so up his ass he'll taste it." The Hokage in all his experience and time spent in the job had heard many different descriptions of the chunin teacher, none quite as politically incorrect or bad as that. This time he didn't even try to reprimand the student for his language, either, it was already a lost cause. "What exactly did he tell you?" Naruto's rapid-fire question knocked the elder out of his thoughts. The Hokage let off another sigh, "You want the whole thing?" When he received a nod he was about to start, however he couldn't help but notice Naruto's frustration. It was his first day at the academy and he was already having to defend himself. He prepared himself for the blonde's reaction. "Apparently you refused to move seats so he could keep an eye on you. You provoked other students, particularly Sasuke Uchiha. When asking students questions you answered before they got a chance. He seemed to think you knocked out the Hyuga heiress and you referred to Shino Aburam as bug fetish." When you asked to go to the toilet you didn't come back for over an hour. When asked why you gave him an in-depth detailed report on your restroom break and how you had created something called Cthulhu. Naruto wasn't happy. He cracked his knuckles before starting, "Well, spank my ass and call me Slutty Sally. That guy is Suo getting a beat down." He muttered it, but the cage heard. He now had a new target, better yet, he had a reason to be angry, and damn he was. He hadn't had that combination for too long, so it was time to get to work. Putting it simply, Kyoshi was fucked. "I'll explain later, old man, we're going to confront this prick and then I'll explain, plus I'll be able to call what was true and false from that liar." He hadn't got this worked up in years, and boy did it feel good. Hiruzen Sarutobi could only shake his head in self-defeat. "I knew coming here was a bad idea. I knew it would get you riled up, and that always ends badly. Stupid, stupid, stupid." After a few face palms he looked up at the scowling blonde with a defeated face. "Can't we just be patient, work this out tomorrow when it's not late? Patience is a virgin, we're getting this done now." Chapter 2 Hatred in History. It didn't take long to find the house with the help of the very unenthusiastic Hokage. Of course he basically had to drag the man to the place in tense silence, but at least his occasional navigating skills were top-notch. In little over 20 minutes he had made it to the driveway of the teacher's house, where he let loose his first comment while walking towards the door with the cage following behind. To think, somebody who spends his day teaching kids can make this amount of dough. It was true. Apparently this guy lived alone, and here he was walking up his cobbled driveway to a large 2-story house surrounded in a huge garden, like come on. He's even got a damn fountain made of marble. He increased his pace when walking up the granite stairs steps towards the large oak door, only to be cut off by the cage. "Naruto, I think it's best if you let me handle this for now. You can take over after." He didn't show any sign of annoyance, instead just choosing to stand to the side. "Whatever he has done must have really worked you up, huh?" He got no response. "I'll find out soon enough though." "Of course you will, and when you find out you'll be madder than me." There was no uncertainty in his voice because he knew it was true. He nodded his head before walking up to the door, giving it a few firm knocks on the entrance that was at least double his height, probably more. "Who is it?" The voice was warm and inviting. "It's just me, I brought Naruto here as he wants to resolve a misunderstanding between us three. He seems to think that you have been unfair to him." He wasn't talking in any serious way or tone, in fact he was talking in a warm one, making it clear that nothing was wrong. He really wasn't expecting this response. "Okage-sama, if you really think I'm going to let that brat in my home," he basically ground out the words, making it all too clear what he thought of the azure-eyed Uzumaki. He was well within his right too, the boy had been a bother, and the cage understood that. His face turned grim. "I see, so that's the case. The man who owned this very prestigious house was a loyal shinobi, he was a good ninja and wanted the best for the kids he taught. That's why he wasn't expecting this result even after the loss of his family courtesy of the Kyuubi attack. I thought you were a better man than that, Kyoshi." He wasn't going to have this conversation. Not on his front door for all to see and hear, and especially not with Naruto here. Any pride he had over the village was reduced every time an incident like this came up. He had known Kyoshi for years, fought with him in war, and he had been the best of men. Kind-hearted, strong and good-natured were all viable words used to describe him, but now he was like this. But the Kyuubi attack hatred was reaching for him, with Naruto coming along it had a grasp, after nearly a decade later he was a changed man. Kyoshi responded, tone nasty, "With all due respect sir. The boy is a curse. Nobody wants him and nobody ever will, and for a good reason too. Everyone else hates him just as much as he hates himself." That last one really cut through Naruto. With a moment of rage he leaned back and put his fist right through the door, causing it to unhinge and fall to the ground. "Say that again you bastard, and I'll fed your wrinkly ass to my goldfish. There may not be many, but I do have loved ones." During the last sentence his voice cracked, there was a lot of doubt in that topic, and everyone knew it despite his effort of secrecy. Kyoshi rounded the corner coming face to face with the pair, face red out of anger. "Don't you get it boy," he screamed, "nobody would ever love somebody like you." It was clear that the elder shinobi was going to keep going, and to be quite frank, he had enough. He was just too slow. Kyoshi, the name was said in nothing more than a calm monotone act of gaining the man's attention. He could never really picture Sarutobi as a cage, but now he would well believe it. His eyes were barely visible due to the traditional cage hat blocking their view, but the little that were seemed to pierce through everything in its path. The very ground where he stood was cracked and ragged, as if an immense invisible weight had been dropped in the spot he stood. Kyoshi was reduced to haggard breaths, a heavy sweat visible on his face. Voice still calm he continued in monotone, "I can stand your indiscipline towards me. This village seems to no longer give me the respect I once held, and you are just another to join that group, but to mock Naruto in front of me is to put your very life at risk. Do I make myself clear?" He stopped briefly, letting the word sink in and letting the man know he was telling the absolute truth. He signed, letting the directed killing intent drop. I expected better from you. You know exactly how it works, yet even you are blinded by hate. Again there was a few seconds of silence before the cage called his name, making him jump. Truthfully, what did you do today at the academy? He took a few seconds to think, trying to steady his nerves under what he had just witnessed. I ran away during class to clear my head when I should have been at the toilet. Apart from that and flipping him off, that was it. His voice was low and mellow. He was remembering a recent memory that he wasn't too fond of. Clearing your head, huh, exactly like your mother. You'll bottle everything up and release it when nobody is looking. He was about to respond when Kiyoshi interrupted. Liar, I saw you knock out the Hyuga heiress. He had his fist raised, showing that he was struggling to keep his emotions at bay. The elder Sarutobi solved the matter instantly before the blonde Atopic could give a response, his voice abrupt and cruel. Anyone with half a brain would notice how she reacts to him. Ever since she was young she's always had a thing for the boy. He spared a glance to Naruto to see his reaction, and it surprised him. It was clear he already knew. He suspected as much, it was all a lie. A feeble attempt by an old worn-out man to hassle somebody in the hopes of settling a grudge, original right. Stuttering as things clearly weren't going his way, he fell back onto his last stand, and a terrible one at that. Well, he was being disturbing in class. He would answer other people's questions and generally be the nuisance he is. Every slight mention of Naruto was said with distaste, something that was yet again testing the cage's patience. Naruto finally got a chance to bite back, so he was gonna make sure he took a large chunk. The only reason I answered the questions was because I was the only one that knew them. Better yet, you didn't direct them at anybody. I would put up my hand and give an answer that you would ignore before moving on to another. As for being a nuisance, I assume you're referring to conversation. I sat beside Sasuke, and the occasional time I did talk was when everyone else was, yet you only shouted at me. He could tell Naruto wasn't lying and he had heard enough. Walking forward with narrowed eyes and ignoring Kiyoshi's retort, he stopped a touching distance before whispering, so that only he could hear, there was a few times tonight where you nearly slipped the secret. The presence he was giving off was something only a cage could do. If it ever does get out, you better run, pray and cling to your life, because unless I have certain proof that it was somebody else, you're getting the blame for your actions towards my grandson. You do know what that means, don't you? He let the threat hang in the air before walking away, only to stop at the door, and Kiyoshi, don't come back to the academy, ever. With that he emptied a full blow of killing intent directly at Kiyoshi, causing the ground between them to crack and the man to fall to his knees. His conscience had faded before he hit the ground. Outwardly he was calm and composed, but inwardly he was ecstatic. It had been years since he had done something like that. It feels good to be back. What he had just done would no doubt cause him a lot of trouble, but he wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. It was time to put the council in their place. Naruto simply stared, wide-eyed at the display. Wow, old man, you're not half bad. The face faulted, what do I have to do to earn your respect? The silent walk back to his apartment was awkward to say the least. Although he appreciated the geezer for doing what he did, he still didn't feel right for allowing it. He knew the seriousness of what just occurred. What the cage had technically done was attack one of his own shinobi for no reason. Well, that's how the council would see it, and they would make sure to call him up on it. The cage had put his neck on the line for him, and he knew he should be more thankful. That being said, he was still angry at himself for getting into the situation in the first place. Maybe if I acted better then it wouldn't have happened. He knew that wasn't true though. No matter how nice he ever was or how pleasant he tried to be, he got treated the same. Like the nuisance he was. And he liked to do things himself. His problems were his. He would win his own battles. The cage had apologized profusely about his treatment on the first day and ensured it would improve, but he didn't have his hopes up. Everybody treated him like that, and for no damn reason either. One of these days I'm gonna lose it, there's only so much I can take. He was sitting on his couch looking down at the floor between his legs. Arms resting on his side, he was rigid and tense, clenched fists displaying his anger. Calm down, Naruto. There's nothing you can do, what's done is done. The calm and grandfatherly voice was not what he needed to hear right now, add on the realization of just what his day-to-day life was, and he cracked. There is nothing to be calm about. My life is one big clusterfuck, and when one shitstorm passes another one starts. You know what that feels like. Forget about all the crap that happened at the academy. The day I was told to go home and practice kunai and shuriken throwing for tomorrow. I wasn't given any and didn't have any money to buy them, so how am I meant to get good at the one thing I want to do? Everything. I mean everything I do is at a disadvantage to others. When they play, I worry. When they train, I'm collecting resources, and that's even if there's a way to do so. Most shops won't let me enter, and others charge double or more. What the hell am I meant to do? His head snapped up at the last sentence, exposing blood-red slit eyes before it feebly fell back down. He was worn out. There was silence for a few minutes. Naruto simply glared at his feet while the elder Cage was considering his next words. A slow pitter-patter of rain ricocheting off the old roof was their only sound that the dead knight of Konoha no Sato provided. He spoke in a careful tone, mindful not to set the boy off. "What is it you want, Naruto?" "I don't know." His voice was dead. He opted not to comment on that. Instead he walked over to the kettle and filled it from the tap before asking another question. "Do you have a dream, Naruto?" "Dreams are for dead men and people with a chance at life." "I don't have a dream." Unknowingly he drew blood from his hand, clenching them too tight. "What's the point if you know it'll never happen?" A little part of him died when he admitted that, but he was a realist. How was some backwash orphan meant to make anything with their life in a ninja village if he lived in a small town with normal people? Maybe, a ninja village, no way. 80% of ninja were from a clan or family with shinobi backgrounds. Civilian kids that managed to become ninja were lucky to make it to chunin, never higher. They simply didn't have the genes to do so. By the time Uchiha Yamanaka reached double figures, their chakra pool already dwarfed an adult civilians, so how was he, an orphan boy with no funds, help or anyone willing to guide him, meant to make something of his life? Academy he could do, but what then? Seeing his question have a negative effect on the blonde, he again backed off. Seeing the kettle marker indicate that it was full, he turned off the tap before walking back to the kettle base. Setting it on, he flicked the switch only for it to not work. This caused a grimace. He then walked over to the oven before placing it onto the hob. "It didn't work either. Looks like we're doing this without tea." He set the kettle down before walking over to the couch. Despite the dirty look, he sat down next to the blonde, ignoring the fact that he immediately got up and moved to the wall. "I guess this is going to be harder than the first time." He had to start somewhere though. "Naruto, what do you know about the founders of our village?" The boy at question gave him a look that clearly said he wasn't welcome in his home anymore before answering. "What is this, 20 questions? Why would I care about the founders of this nightmare? If anyone had a right to think that, it was him." He again ignored the disrespect. He was more concerned about the boy's words. "You have no reason to think that, Naruto." It was a bold statement, one that made him lock eyes with the demon in his gut rather than the boy. Before he was interrupted, he continued. "Do you really think you're the only one to be treated like this? I'll admit. You've had it bad, very bad. But it could always be worse. Be thankful for what you have and find something to cherish." He had now gained the boy's attention. "If that ever happens and you lose it all, then you can complain, you can lounge around and be depressed like others, but until you've experienced the pain, I won't allow you to continue like you are." It was tough love that fixed Kushina. Hopefully it would work on Naruto too. He gave the boy a stern look that caused no reaction, nor did he react to the words in any way. That didn't mean the boy wasn't listening, in fact he seemed to be interested in the words. It only took a few moments to receive a response. "You think you know everything?" The voice was low and hollow, making the hair on his neck stand on edge. "In reality, you don't know what you're talking about." It wasn't the first time he and the Cage had talked about his attitude, however it usually ended there. The Cage didn't normally pressure him like he was about to. "Oh, but I do. I don't claim to know everything, but I know what you're going through, or at least have an idea. Many years ago I was having this very same conversation with a kid around your age. She was similar to you in fact in that she had no friends, no family and no money. Do you want to know what she did?" He got no response, but could tell he was waiting on his next sentence, eager for some advice on fixing his life. What she did was remarkable and something little could comprehend, let alone do. She did nothing. His eyes widened, causing a smile to break on his aged face. Instead of complaining, instead of letting her responsibilities take hold of her, she lived. She didn't hide her feelings like you, she took one day at a time, step by step until eventually she had friends, had those she cared for and of course had money to do as she pleased. You know what else, the village loved her." Naruto was listening to his every word, each one getting his utmost attention until he stopped. He was captivated by the story, the sheer excitement and enthrallment it shot through him was like a firework, but that was the problem, fireworks died out, and so did his excitement once reality knocked him back into place. It was a story, a fairy tale story that happened to somebody else, not him. What was this girl's name then? Who was she? He just had to ask that question, didn't he? "I cannot tell you, Naruto, but I will when you're older." All his work was reverted back to nothing as the hopeful eyes returned to their cold as ice state. But that response, the whiskered blonde tiredly moved his head to look at the ceiling as he slowly slid his back down the wall, putting him in a sitting position. Again he glared at the ground before letting out a short dry laugh. "You're such a foul old man, it's always the same. Remember when I used to ask you who my parents were?" This time it was the Cage's turn to be silent. "You always said the same thing, I cannot tell you, Naruto, but I will when you're older." This time the silence lingered. One was trying to find the right words to say, the other was basking in self-doubt. It was a while before Naruto asked the inevitable question. "Why am I treated so poorly by the people?" The Cage could only hang his head in shame. You know the answer to that question. I cannot tell you. He didn't bother lifting his head at the sound of a fist smashing against one of the flimsy walls. He pulled his small fist out of the hole before again sitting down, ignoring the scrapes and cuts he got for his effort. He knew it wasn't the cage's fault. He knew none of it was, but he couldn't stop himself from getting angry. He cracked a small smile, hitting something always did make me feel a little better. It was part of the reason he had trained so much before entering the academy. He refused to be just another person, another ninja that would only ever amount to cannon fodder because he would make something with his life. He would be different, not the cookie-cutter design ninja that did the job for income and nothing more. He understood that maybe he was being too ambitious, just maybe he should be thankful for what he got in life, but that was the thing, he wanted more. Not in a greedy way, not at all. He had a great interest in history, he loved it. The events fascinated him and the people intrigued him, but if history ever taught him anything, it was that this world, his life, no matter how bad always had something to offer, something to aim for. Thinking these thoughts calmed him, maybe that was one of the reasons he enjoyed history so much. Looking at everything in hindsight was always so much more enjoyable. It was then he remembered the original question before his ongoing argument with the cage resurfaced. Clearing his throat he thought over his actions. Like always the cage would talk to him or have a word a couple of times a year, and like always he would try and help him because that's the thing. The old man cared for him. It was then that the routine changed. He had enough of the kind words and the secrets and he snapped. He snapped at somebody who only wanted the best for him. This time it was his turn to lower his head in shame. He cleared his throat. I know you're only trying to help me, but it's frustrating. He lightened the tense mood the only way he knew how. You think it's that time of the month. The Hokage was nodding his head up until the last sentence until a small patch of red spread across his face. Where'd you learn about the birds and the bees? Naruto shrugged, a small smile creeping onto his face as he let go of his problems. There would be time to think about them later. Plenty of it. The red light district is only 2 blocks down, and you know what I'm like. Exploring is pretty fun when you head that way. He has a knowing grin. In reality he had never been in the red light district, but he did know everything about the so-called talk. Bless my young innocent mind. Before the cage could say anything more he rose to his feet before walking over to the fridge and getting an instant ramen. He took the kettle and popped it into the main segment of the oven. It was unorthodox and took a lot longer, but it worked. While doing so he spoke, now, before things got depressing and self-harming I believe we were playing 20 questions. I think I'll take you up on that last one. My history fetish needs satisfied because as his pupil you can tell me way more than any book can. The childish smile he wore while speaking that sentence would unnerve anybody. Something about an 8-year-old saying those sorts of things with an innocent smile just didn't seem right. Add on the fast-paced bouncing on his feet due to excitement only instant ramen could provide. It looked creepy. He dully noted how Naruto had did a 180 in terms of personality. The boy was oppressing his feelings, something that was both a skill and a bomb waiting to reach its limit. It would have to be fixed, but with previous events happening that night, it would have to be ignored until a later date. The aged man tried to ignore the boy's habits. With a look that clearly said he was thinking he eventually answered, how much do you know about the founders? Let me think, he gave a thoughtful pause, nothing. The cage face faltered. What? Getting information on the First World War was hard enough as it is. Trying to find actual descriptions or information about a single person is like trying to find a shit in a sewer. By the time you get there it's watered down and mixed in with everything else, impossible to find, or in this case impossible to differentiate. The cage was going to ask how the blonde knew that information before thinking against it. His mind would do better not knowing. However, as unpleasant as his simile was, it was true. There weren't many books about the warring clan era or the First World War. The little there were tended to be based on actual events or battles, rather than information about specific people, no matter how famous they were. I suppose that mystery is what makes people consider their power legendary. The elder Sarutobi closed his eyes. Something about reminiscing and thinking about these distinct yet fond memories made him feel young and free again, not tired and stressed like the majority of his life had been. Listen close young one, you're about to hear the story of living legends. The cage folded his legs trying to get comfortable. Listen well young one, these people are important figures as to why the world is the way it is today. We'll start with Hashirama Senju as I know more about him. Hashirama was a great man, a powerful one too. Through the use of his special Mokuton bloodline, he was able to mix water and earth together, thus creating wood as hard as steel and warm to the touch. Hashirama stood for peace and prosperity. It was his dream that brought together the clans and ended the warring clan era, thus he became our first Hokage. Out of them we know the most about him as he was the most open and inviting. Now onto Madara. Wait. That's it. He looked up to see Naruto hanging on to his every word, like every fact he memorized was worth a splendid price. Waving his arms angrily Naruto shouted, that can't be it old man, I need more. History really was Naruto's drug, or as he put it, his fetish. He chuckled and shook his head. Don't worry. I'm just giving you an overview of them before I get into the good stuff. The boy's face changed from outrage to smiling warmly, eyes in an upside-down U in a split second. He decided to promptly continue, fearing for his safety if he took too long. Madara Uchiha was Hashirama's equal in terms of power. Although cold and intimidating, it was said that he truly cared for the village. This was proven in the First Shinobi World War, when he single-handedly lay siege to Suna for 3 days and 3 nights, effectively taking them out of the war. Naruto had his mouth open in shock. How can somebody be that powerful? He took on an entire village by himself and won. The cage continued without missing a beat. He was the owner to the legendary bloodline of the Uchiha. The Sharingan. This Taijutsu grants immense power, but most of it is unknown as not very many ever managed to unlock it. Even without this Taijutsu, he was still one of the strongest this world has ever seen. Similarly to Hashirama, he wanted peace and prosperity. It was his dream that led to the creation of Konoha, thus he was the one that named it. It was said he treated Hashirama like a bother. However, after the death of Zuko, he slowly detached himself from the village. Ultimately, he defected before being killed by Hashirama at the Valley of the End. It said that not a few hours later and Hashirama succumbed to his injuries also. Naruto was at awe about the information when something confused him. Wait, wasn't Zuko the third founder of the village? I thought nobody knew anything about him. Everybody knew his name and his relatives, but that was about it. Like Hashirama and Madara, he was recognized as legendary. Everybody considered those 3 to be simply better than anyone else, and that was almost new. He included. That is true, but there's a reason I'm telling you this, isn't there? I met the man and I can tell you, he was special. The way he carried himself, the way he looked and the way he acted, it reminded him eerily of the boy. That couldn't be coincidence, could it? No, it wasn't. He didn't have it. By this point Naruto had forgotten all about the kettle boiling. The loud bubbling, however, reminded him. Taking the kettle out, he poured it into his instant ramen before making his way back over to the wall where he again sat down. So if this guy Zuko was so good, why don't we know anything about him? He wouldn't have been as strong as Hashirama and Madara though, am I right? The cage gave a genuine smile. He couldn't hold the excitement out of his voice. No matter how you perceive the word strong, Zuko fulfilled it. He could go toe-to-toe with the other 2 and was said to have a genius mind. Just talking about this was like reliving memories with the 3, it was amazing. Again the Uzumaki's mouth was agape, shaking his head at near breakneck speed. Literally, he knocked himself out of his daze before shouting, "Well, what are you waiting for, old man? Give him the rundown. The ultra-cool shinobi file." Mush. He all but screamed the last word. He knew he wasn't going to get very far without getting interrupted. Naruto knew the least about Zuko, and if he knew the blonde, Zuko would be his favorite. The third founder of the village was known as Zuko Namikaze. He glanced over at Naruto to see his expression similar to that of a fish. He also seemed to have temporarily inhibit one's brain too, as his open shaking hand that had once held ramen now didn't. It had fell and was slowly spreading over the worn wooden floor, not that he paid it any attention. He let off a low chuckle. That's a miracle in itself before continuing. Unlike his 2 friends, Zuko didn't come from a clan. Back then the Namikaze name wasn't recognized like the Uchiha or Senju. To anyone that had not heard of him, he was just another person. However, he was equal with the other 2. He was the owner of his very own Taijutsu, known as the Gattrigan, and is the only person known to ever have it. And before you ask, we know nothing other than that he was born with it. He ignored the boy's loud sigh. The only people that ever saw its true power are dead, and nothing was ever recorded. Although Madara did state that it had similarities with the Sharingan, it is unclear which was more powerful. Unlike the other 2 though, Zuko did not strive towards peace. He wanted it, but believed that it could not be done until a later date because wars were fresh in the mind of nations. He had a slightly more distant relationship with the village too. Hashirama told me that originally Zuko was to become first Hokage under his and Madara's recommendation, but he refused it. Once the village had been set up, he tended to take long-term solo missions, leaving for months at a time and sometimes up to a year. Towards the end of his life he was the bridge between Hashirama's and Madara's relationship, but when he died, so did their connection. Madara no longer had reason to stay as his clan turned away from him, so he left, which led to their fated death battle. His tone ended on a sad note. Naruto was astonished at what he heard, not only at the fact this guy was a Namikaze, but that he had his very own Taijutsu. The 4th Hokage was always his favorite, and in a way he looked up to the man, so naturally he knew all about him. He had a few questions regarding the Namikaze, but for now he would focus on Zuko. His brain was craving more knowledge. So we know absolutely nothing about the Taijutsu? He got a nod. Well then, how did the guy die? I thought you said he was as strong as Madara and Hashirama. The only people that could take them down were one another. The Hokage pulled up his sleeve and looked at his watch. It was well past midnight now, but he would answer a few questions for the blonde. after all he did have a trying day. He died in the climax of the first shinobi war known as the Battle of Redwater, the battle that ended the war and probably the bloodiest in history. Suna had already been defeated by Madara earlier in the year, so with one force down, Konoha could focus on the others. Back then there were no alliances. It was every village for themselves, and they all met for a final decisive battle on the edge of water country. Garigakure was on its last legs though they had fallen back, and as you might expect, this caused the other nations to push forward to stop them. Putting this useless knowledge to good use brought a smile to his face. The fact that a future shinobi of the Leaf was this interested in it was great. If the Kiri troops managed to make it to their village, they would slow down the progression of the war for each village. They could lengthen it and rebuild behind their walls as the other three continued battling, wearing themselves down. The hidden stone pushed forward to stop this, as did Kumo, but Hashirama wanted to stop the bloodshed. Although Konoha were winning, if only slightly, Hashirama and Madara were grieved by the losses of their people. They decided to go forward themselves and face the remnants of the war, planning to end it in one swift strike. This time Naruto wasn't awed or amazed, he was angry. What were those idiots thinking? They couldn't take on 3 armies at once, nobody could. A dry chuckle escaped the elder Sarutobi's mouth. That's where you're wrong, Naruto. They could. The two of them were monsters, both had a retreat on side order, and when working together they were unstoppable, a true force of nature. Sadly luck wasn't in their favor that day. He stopped, making sure his memory was correct, and he got this next bit right. As you know, Zuko preferred to stay away from the village. He was on an intel mission behind enemy lines gathering information at the time and found something of great importance, this being that Iwa and the Hidden Cloud had formed an alliance. They both knew Konoha was going to win the war, so they came together to beat them. It would have worked too if it weren't for the Namikaze. Naruto gave a confused look. What difference does that make? This was confusing on so many levels. By this point he was expecting an interrupting question, his answer already prepared. Kumo and Iwa could coordinate their attack. With two nations working together, they could control the flow of the battle. Kiri had been reduced to 5,000 men, Iwa sent in 8,000, and Kumo 9,000. Konoha sent in 2. Now answer me this, Naruto. If you were on the battlefield and you saw entire platoons being taken out by 2 men, who do you think would be the main priority to get rid of? The sun-kissed blonde could only widen his eyes on realization. Fuck, Madara and Hashirama had to go up against 22,000 shinobi. They didn't stand a hope. The Hokage corrected him, 22,000 shinobi and 3 kage. He gave the blonde a moment to think of the sheer scale of what had happened, so Zuko rushed back to try and save them. The Hokage could only marvel at how the 8-year-old's mind was taking all this in. Zuko came back to see Madara and Hashirama on their last legs. Not much is known from then on though. Hashirama didn't like to talk about it and Madara outright refused. What I do know however is that he bought time for them to retreat. Again the cage stopped talking. Even he had a hard time believing what happened next. The thing is, it was fact. That sort of thing didn't just happen for any reason. The room was in a tense silence. The sound of rain pattering against the roof had died, instead replaced by an eerie silence. When they came back with an army, they found 22,000 dead, men and women alike, along with the 3 kage. Nobody knew how many Madara and Hashirama had beaten before the Namikaze's arrival. What they did know was that there were no survivors. He lay in his bed, bloodshot eyes wide open. Hiruzen had left a few hours ago, and he assumed it was nearly morning, but he couldn't get to sleep. It wasn't like he was scared either. Fear left him a long time ago. The constant threat of being attacked and his creaking doors hammered that out. To be honest, he didn't know why this happened, but it wasn't like he was completely out of the picture. This exact scenario would happen maybe 3 or 4 times a year. It wasn't very often, but damn, it was annoying. Come on, I have to be up for the academy tomorrow. He rolled over to lie on his side, giving his eyes a slight rub. For some reason, his eyes always got sore on these sleepless nights. Sore, tight and itchy. Chapter 3, Making Our Foundation. 1 year later. Bored, so bloody bored. It was yet another long day in the academy. If you assumed long meant that the day was going slow, you were absolutely, positively wrong. If you assumed long meant sitting through Iruka-sensei's history lectures that he already knew, doing shuriken and kunai practice that he was already adept at and then finishing the day with chakra theory that had been drilled into his head after about a month, yeah, then you were right. The last year in the academy had been slow to say the least. Turns out the first year of the academy, the beginner year, was used for giving the students a background and knowledge of what being a ninja is all about, along with how to use the traditional basic tools that all ninja will need to function, nothing more and nothing less, for an entire single head-bashing year. This is why currently he was cursing his addiction to history. He was yet again listening to Iruka's morning time lecture. This time it was on the formation of the hidden sand and how they managed to harvest water from the desert. He had known facts like that for as long as he could remember, and yet he was still forced to sit through it all. At least he wasn't the only one going through this. He was pretty sure the Nara, Shikamaru if he remembered, knew it all considering he slept through the history on a regular basis. That being said, he would sleep through everything if he got the chance. Then there was the guy sitting beside him, Sasuke Uchiha. Self-centered, arrogant, prick. Needless to say, he wasn't the biggest fan of Sasuke. When everyone else seemed to worship the ground he walked for being the last loyal member of his clan, he just treated him as he normally did. Just because some guy had been given a bad draw at the world didn't mean he was going to baby him like everyone else. He had been given a pretty bad draw himself, to put it plainly. That was what brought him to another recent irritation of his. Every day he would head to the back row of the class via stairs and head to what was known as Naruto's seat, the one to the very right beside the window. Sasuke had taken to using the seat beside him. He wasn't the only one confused either. Anybody that heard their brief but profane arguments would think they'd hate each other, and they'd be correct. Some of the stuff that spewed out of their mouths when they were heated would make a pirate blush, and that was no lie. There were no boundaries, no line that was too far. When they fought, it wasn't the occasional insult, they went for each other's necks, which never worked out too well for him, you see. Sasuke had a lot of fangirls. Probably the reason he sits next to me so they don't bother him. That brought him to his final and probably most frustrating problem, the fangirls. After his first day being a little bit of a douche to Kyoshi, he had settled down a little. Iruka was a good man, and ultimately he did have respect for him, so he tried to be good when possible. But there was only so much he could take before he snapped. The cause? Fangirls. Who would have thought that the hated orphan boy with nothing to his name would have a following when entering the academy, but thankfully it had come to a quick end. If not, the class might have had a few missing students by the end of the year. After a few days, once they found out his name, they of course went home to tell their parents, and for once he was glad of his terrible reputation. Within a week he had went from the cool popular kid to the hated loser. None of the civilian kids would even spare him a glance, let alone talk to him due to their parents. That being said, he did have a few acquaintances. Toji, a typical brown-haired, food-loving Akimichi, was pretty fair with him. He didn't judge him nor did his parents, so they got on fine. The same could be said with Shikamaru. The problem there was that the two were already close friends, and although he had played shogi and spent some time with them, he quickly got bored. All they wanted to do was shogi, eat and watch clouds, so although they remained friends, they didn't really have the same interests. As for the other kids, it wasn't much better. Kiba was probably the one he was most akin to. They shared a wild nature, could crack a decent joke and enjoyed the same thing. The problem was Kiba's arrogance. In the first week he had unknowingly established himself as one of the better upcoming ninja. That, along with the fact that he had a following of mindless female drones, caused Kiba to name him his rival. Apparently the wild appearance came with a similar personality, as the Inyazuka desired that sort of thing, so immediately, despite his half-hearted efforts, he was considered the enemy. When he gave the mud a beatdown in a spar, the boy had all but declared his dislike of him, and that was the end of that. He had lost the fangirls, but the damage was done. It wasn't that Kiba didn't like him as a person, but the boy had decided they couldn't have a friendly rivalry. Damn Inyazuka and their freaky ways. Was he really the only one to not find it weird that Kiba's mom had a talking dog, and Kiba was perhaps one of the wildest looking Inyazuka he had ever met? He gagged before shoving that thought into the dark, creepy section of his brain, hoping for it to never be found. I'm really fucked if Yamanaka decided to come at me. Then there was Hinata and Shino. He wasn't stupid, far from it. He knew that Hinata had a thing for him despite what her father thought of him. For that he respected her. She didn't let others around her cloud her feelings or judgment of other people, which was a trait he really admired. However, when he tried to befriend the girl, she had been too nervous to act on her feelings. That's what he didn't like. He knew that she liked him, he knew that she would often spy on him thinking he was unaware. Although he understood she was shy and got a hard time from her pompous clan, she had plenty of times to try and act on these feelings. Instead, she preferred to watch him be treated like he was and scorned by the villagers. He didn't blame her for this, who would want to hang around with the village scapegoat? But no matter how much he tried, he eventually began to resent her. Maybe he was having a self-centered moment, but he couldn't understand how someone could watch a cherished one be scorned and hated without doing anything to help. As time passed, he simply stopped caring, so instead of trying to befriend her, he did the usual thing. Whenever she would try and spy on him, he would move and she was never fast enough to keep up. Shino was an Aburum. There was nothing more to it. If he were to guess, Shino probably considered him a friend, but they had maybe spoken a few sentences to each other at most. He was the silent type, very silent indeed. Last but not least, there was Sakura and Ino, or as he knew them, the Banshee and the bossy one. Sakura was a loud-mouthed girl, strange pink hair and a fascination of Sasuke to boot. Because of his attitude, he had received quite a few beatings from the girl, but he would always manage to get one right back, whether that would be an insult or to destroy her in the girl's pride and joy, written tests. He wouldn't say he hated Sakura, but he definitely disliked her. It was nothing compared to Sasuke though. The Uchiha hated the duo because of their constant pestering. For once, he didn't blame the fella. It was a horrid existence that he would wish on very few. Sadly, Sasuke was one of those people, and it just so happened that Kami had answered his prayers. As for Ino, the predicament was quite similar. Despite her feminine charm, she was, to put it plainly, a bossy bitch. There had been a few times when he had clashed heads with her, and he wasn't the sort of guy to back down when an argument started. Ino didn't like him. People knew that he had no filter, and if somebody started an argument with him, they expected that no blow would be too low. In his mind, it was the essence of being a ninja. If he needed to, he had no problems distracting or silencing a target by using any means necessary. Trash talking just happened to be one of them. Naruto. How many times do I have to tell you? He looked around lazily for the source of the voice. Don't sleep in class. He lifted his head before a small lazy smile broke onto his face. Sorry Iruka-sensei, won't happen again. His voice was one of tiredness and boredom. It probably didn't help that he finished in a yawn. Iruka walked over to the board, pointing at it dramatically. That's what you say every time, Naruto. You'll be staying behind today to learn what you missed. Naruto's lazy eyes snapped open to that. No way was he staying behind after class. I don't need to. Ask me a question and I'll prove that I already know it. He cracked a smile. Soon as history was simple. If I get it wrong, then I promise to never sleep in history again. When it came to history, he didn't get it wrong if he took the time to learn it. The odds were that he had learned it. Never sleep again, huh? The voice was thoughtful and considerate, as if weighing in his options. Fine, but even you're not going to get it right, Naruto. We hadn't covered Zuko Namikaze until today. A smile came to his face when he saw the Uzumaki's smile slip into a frown. Crap. He must have decided to move on to a different topic when I was blanked out. It just had to be Zuko Namikaze, the one guy that nobody seemed to know anything substantial about. He knew a bit about the man thanks to Hiruzen. He just hoped the vital stuff he knew was asked, not the less violent stuff covered in the academy. Like why the hell they had to learn what Hashirama Senju's favorite food was. Mushroom mixed soup, thank you very much. Now, Zuko Namikaze is remembered as one of the greatest shinobi of his time, alongside the first Hokage and Madara Uchiha. What was the name of the Dojutsu that only he possessed? He was unnerved to see Naruto's grin. The name of the Dojutsu is the Gattrigan. With it he was able to go head to head with both Madara and Hashirama. It is unknown how he got this Dojutsu or if it is unlocked, but many assume he was born with it due to a genetic mutation. The powers of the Dojutsu are unknown, although it is meant to be similar to the Sharingan. His voice had no trace of glee or confidence. It was a textbook answer in a serious voice. It's not too often you get to see him this serious unless he's sparring with Sasuke. He didn't let his shock at the answer being correct show. Very good, Naruto. Now, we all know how much of a fighter this legend was, but what about his personal life? He again smiled when Naruto's frown became significantly deeper. To be honest, he didn't mind having to go over this with Naruto. It allowed him to hammer the information into the rest of the class, and they always seemed to learn better with something less monotonous was going on. At the moment they were paying abrupt attention between who would win the verbal duel. Everyone knows that Zuko had a son before he died, but who was his wife? Oh shit. It just had to be the personal questions. What was with people? He didn't understand why the village academy thought it was important to know every major detail or relative of somebody famous. He put up his hand, signaling to Iruka that he needed a minute to think. Okay, so I know that he had a son. His name was Bakuyo. I know a lot about him, but what was the name of his mother? After their conversation that night, he had made a point to check into the Hokage's office for more information on the trio. He couldn't get much more about them, but he found out a lot about their families and relatives. It was time to put his mind to use. He retraced his steps, taking in what he knew to see if he could think of anything more. So Bakuyo wasn't like his father. Growing up, his life was hard. His father, Zuko, died 3 months before he was born, and his mother died when he was 5 because of a disease. Due to this and growing up in times of war, he disliked the life of a ninja. Although he excelled through the ranks and was known for his skills, his dislike of killing cost his life on a solo mission. He died at a young age. Now, what were his skills? He was said to be very proficient with wind, but apart from that it's unknown, that's it. His eyes widened in realization before banging his fist off the table in triumph. This earned him strange looks and a few giggles, but he paid no mind to it. He started his answer from the very start, making sure he got everything right, plus it might earn him a few bonus marks from Iruka. His son, Bakuyo, was expected to have the Gattrigan and was known for being put under a lot of pressure as the council wanted to make it a part of Konoha, similar to the Sharingan and the Byakugan. However, many years after his death it was found out that he did not have the correct genetic makeup for the Dojutsu, as it was negated by his mother's gene. The only way a gene like that can be made passive is that if it has something at equal strength to it, another Dojutsu gene. This means that Bakuyo's mother, Zuko's wife, was either Uchiha or Hyuga, and if I remember correctly, her name was Uchiha. His voice became questioning towards the end, but he was confident that he was right. Although he was unaware, the majority of the class had their jaws dropped at his background information and logical answer. Haruka didn't, over the past year he had come to expect it. Very good Naruto, however it's pronounced Reichiha. Although I haven't yet talked about Bakuyo, what you said is also correct. He was scrutinized by some members of the council for not being able to awaken his father's coveted bloodline. His life was a trying one, he had nobody to guide him or help him, and although he was treated like a prince by the majority of the village, he held no love for his life as a ninja. After his death it was thought that the Namikaze line had died out, but it resurfaced a few years later, in the form of our Yondaime Hokage, who was his orphan son that he must have fathered some time before his death. He finished in a sad tone. The Namikaze truly were a cursed clan. They popped out of nowhere during the Warring Clan era in the form of Zuko, and then ended 3 generations later. Although he had a bad start in life, losing his parents to the Kyuubi attack, he had to say it had been a gift since then. He loved his job at the academy, and passing on the will of fire to the next generation was a treat, that's why he truly pitied the Namikazes. Despite the clan's efforts, it always ended giving itself up for the sake of the village. Zuko sacrificed himself to protect his friends, one of them being the first Hokage. Bakuyo lived the life of a ninja despite hating it, even then he still did numerous high-ranking missions, before eventually succumbing to his death on a secret mission. Finally there was the 4th Hokage, the last of the line and the best ninja of his generation, the Toad Sage's student and the village's favorite Kage. Although he didn't have the power of the first, he was certainly stronger than the Nidaime and the Sandaime, but where he really prospered was with the politics and the fineness that the other 3 admittedly struggled with. Under his short rule there was peace in the village and everyone respected his power. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The Kyuubi made sure of that. It was said that the 4th was expecting a child, but he doubted it. Probably a rumor by some random housewife that caught fire. Although the people didn't want to admit it, they knew the Namikaze line had died out, that was for sure. The Namikaze name wasn't like the Uchiha or Senju. When a member heard the name of an Uchiha or Senju they were cautious, they knew the power of those clans, and any member from them was one to be wary of. The Namikaze was registered in a completely different league. There had only ever been one living at a time, but such was the fear of the Namikaze name even a child would be considered a threat. Before Bakuyo was even a ninja he had a bounty and was named a criminal by the other nations, that was the fear that the name caused. During the academy teacher's thoughts, a certain blonde-haired Uzumaki took the time to analyze his surroundings, one of the many perks of sitting at the back of his class. Choji, Hinata and a few civilians were looking at him in a strange way, he didn't really know what it was meant to mean, as nobody had ever really looked at him like that. Shikamaru seemed to be studying him, as if trying to put something together. The rest were giving the usual scowls, trying to put him down after acing the test. Ah, they never learn. He leaned back on his chair making it swing before he set both legs on his desk with a loud thump, effectively leaning on its 2 legs. With that he closed his eyes and started whistling a jaunty tune. Oh how I do love me a pop quiz. If looks could kill, he'd be dead long ago. He released a sigh, something that had been happening more and more recently. He was well into the latter years of his life, yet he was still left with the seemingly never-ending task of Hokage, and it was only getting harder. In the last year alone the Uchiha massacre had happened. That was a headache on its own, but to think about that would only turn his sore head into a migraine. He quickly forced it to the back of his mind. Beside that he also had the constant hindrance of Danzo and his grunts. At the moment they were actually quite helpful to the village, being able to take on the dirty work that needed to be done was always helpful, but he just hoped the man wouldn't push his luck like he did a few years ago. He was sure that if it was anyone else in his position the man would have been killed for treason. Over the past year he had somewhat tamed the council, civilian and shinobi side alike. While there was still a few outbursts it wasn't half as bad as what he had been getting before, however he was still being bombarded by the usual question, and it was one he was completely clueless on. Who will be your successor? At the start it had offended him that he was even being asked that, however after sitting down with the Nara clan head, Shikaku, he had been politely told their reasoning. Every old man was stubborn and he was no exception. He didn't want to believe he was past his prime, although it drained him the life of a ninja was all he had ever known, and trying to accept that he was getting weaker as the years went by was a daunting task. He had given up his title once, but in that case there couldn't be a more suitable candidate. Even if Minato didn't take the title, Orochimaru would have made a great Kage. However now was a different case. Since then Konoha had fallen far, their reputation for producing skilled ninja was as high as ever, but keeping them ninja had proved difficult. Back in the golden age Konoha was powerful, no village could match them and for obvious reasons too. The Uchiha clan were at an all-time high in terms of power, each year they were producing ninja that would make great jounin if not chunin. They also had the likes of Tsukumo Haddock, Minato Namikaze and the legendary Sannin in their forces. It wasn't like the village was currently low in power, they had recovered well from the attack, and it was clear that they could go head to head with any village if need be. The problem was that they didn't have that extra something that they were known for, not the one-man army ninja that if needed, could take any situation and turn it in the village's favor. He could do that once, but age had took a factor on him, he would be surprised if he won a fight with any of the other kage in the state he was. That was where his problem lay. There wasn't any one person, one perfect candidate that he could pass the title to. Due to the events of the massacre, the two shinobi that he would have considered were no longer viable. One was dead and the other was a missing nin. He could always pass the title to Hiyashi Hyuga, but the man did not have the respect and power needed for the position. Another detergent for this was the control his clan had over him. He was not suitable. Another option would be the man that alerted him to this problem, Shikaku Nara. Being the Nara clan head he definitely would have the intellect, in fact he would probably be the wisest Hokage the village had seen, power wasn't a problem either. With the use of his clan techniques and cunning he would pass himself, however the problem here was that Nara never took interest in the title. They were admittedly lazy and would do as little as possible to succeed, only ever coming to action in the tough times. He was a viable option, but not one that he or the man wanted. This meant he was only left with two other people that were suitable for the job, his students, and what's left of the legendary Sannin, Jiraiya or Tsunade Senju. He again let loose a sigh as he dragged his hand over his face. Those students of his were the cause of a lot of headaches. He hadn't spoken to one in years, and yet she still managed to drag him into problems of hers. The perfect option for the job and the one he'd most like to succeed in was Jiraiya, the last loyal Sannin. He had the power, the fame and respect needed as well as the intelligence. He was experienced and knew how the world worked as he had lived a long and mostly successful life. However, there was a reason why Jiraiya couldn't take the title. Aside from the fact that he would outright refuse it, something that he had tried and failed to talk him out of, he was also too important to the village. The spy network that he ran was unparalleled to anything the other villages had, letting them always be one step ahead. If the man didn't run it then Konoha wouldn't have the constant advantage that they'd become accustomed to. Such was his loyalty to the village that he even neglected his only living relative to attend the matter. Blood-related or not, the man cared for the boy, but despite his pestering, he would refuse to spend time with him, insisting he had important matters to deal with. He couldn't tell whether the Sannin simply didn't care for him or he was afraid of being rejected by the boy for not being there for him in his youth. He truly didn't know. Tsunade was a completely different problem. She acted on impulse, she had a very bad temper, she had an alcohol problem, and could probably bring Konoha into a recession within a year of her term, something he definitely wouldn't put past her. The reason he considered her was simple, it would bring her back. There wasn't a better medic alive, and having her influence back in the village wouldn't just be benefiting, it would strengthen them tenfold. Being able to have 1 out of every 10 active ninja in the village a medic was one of his long-time goals, and now that an era of peace had ensued, he wanted to make that happen, but for the first time in history, Konoha was without a world-class healer. Bringing her back would be influential, and she would adapt to the role of Cage, and then that's where he hit the next dead end. She wouldn't come back. She had lost loved ones in the last war and never recovered, she let depression take a hold of her, and like that she left. If it was anyone else they would have been declared a missing nin, but he couldn't bear to cut bonds with another of his students. That's what brought him here, waiting to see if his invited guest would make an appearance so he could solve the situation. Or he could simply end the elusive game that the reluctant man was playing. Kakashi. With that one word, a tall silver-haired figure dropped from the ceiling, quickly getting into a kneeling position as was accustomed of Anbu before responding with a hi. With gravity-defying hair, slanted forehead protector and a black face mask, the only visible part of him was his single black eye. Just returning from yet another mission, the man was wearing the standard Anbu uniform, the only anomaly being the stain on blood running up his right arm and a cracked dog mask hanging by his hip. Rise. The man wordlessly did so, as expected of any and all Anbu. The stern and tense atmosphere wasn't one of any great importance, again, it was accustomed for Anbu to act like this and for standard mission reports to be done quickly and professionally. After all, Akages had plenty of chores to attend to daily, and an Anbu had to be doing missions or training for the next one. It was as simple as that when on duty. His hardened eyes locked with the man before his cold appearance grew a warm smile. No need to be so formal, Kakashi. I assume you know why I called you here. Kakashi was the exception in these Anbu laws. As if waiting to be given the go-ahead, his straightened form and tense posture relaxed into a slouch, he leaned against a near wall before pulling out a small orange-backed book, giving it his utmost attention. To the untrained eye it would look like the silver-haired man was paying him no heed, as if ignoring him. However, that was untrue. If there's one thing he had learned about Kakashi over the years, it was to never underestimate him. Being the son of the late Tsukumo Haddock, Kakashi had a natural talent for all things ninja. Being the only surviving student of the 4th Hokage as well as boasting over 1,000 jutsu in his arsenal, the man had a lot to offer, but more importantly, he could offer more. That was the meaning behind this conversation, hopefully. What he was going to do would be considered lunatic by many and would no doubt annoy the man, but he had to play his cards right. Kakashi had cunning and lots of it, he could manipulate any conversation to his liking without his target knowing. Hell, the man was like a Uchiha, the only difference being you didn't have to make eye contact before you found yourself doing his will. No genjutsu, no tricks. Just simple, basic bending someone to his will. The man's response to his question cut him from his thoughts. Yes, Hokage-sama. You want my mission report? He wasn't given time to answer. As expected, the rumors were true. Kiri have entered into a civil bloodline war. Being tasked to kill a few of Yagura's generals was tough, but you have no need to tell me this, Kakashi. He cut across the Anbu's report. I assume they're dead. He received a simple nod. To be perfectly honest, he was sick of routine and he knew Kakashi would succeed. For one, he was alive, that was proof in itself, and the second was that Kakashi didn't fail missions. The man was a machine. Seeing that Kakashi was about to take his leave, a tired smile returned to his face. Not so fast, Kakashi. He gestured to the seat in front of his desk. I have an important matter to solve and I need your help. The last remnant of the once great clan took the seat, allowing a look of confusion to come to what little of his face was exposed. I'm happy to help, but I don't see myself being able to solve any problems you can't. He only shook his head to that. Reaching into his desk, he pulled out his pipe. Kakashi, this conversation we're about to have won't make you happy. But I warn you now, let me get my point across and try to understand. If his words affected the shinobi in any way, it didn't show. He put some tobacco into the pipe and set it into the corner of his mouth. These thoughts of mine, the ones that lead me to this, started a few years ago, but quite recently these thoughts became real enough to provoke an action, and this is where we are now. As usual, Kakashi preferred to remain silent, choosing to find out more about his situation rather than make a comment. He lit his pipe with a wordless fire jutsu before blowing out a puff of smoke. The night of Orochimaru's escape has haunted me for my weakness. Because of my indecisive actions and my failure to act, it has caused distasteful events and actions to happen that could have been prevented. However, on that night I wasn't the only one to fall short. That sentence got a reaction, whether it was suppressed anger or surprise, he couldn't tell. I assume you know what I'm talking about, Kakashi-kun. Hiruzen continued smoking, unfazed by the look on the man's expression. I do. Kakashi's glare wasn't directed at his questioner, but instead the floor. I understand that I messed up that day, but I was still young, I had not received the advanced Anbu training that I have now. Hiruzen just shook his head. I refuse to believe that. You were stronger, faster and fraught with purpose back then. Now you have mellowed, you have bottled your emotions about Obito, Rin and Minato so much that you can't move on from the past, and ultimately, you are depressed. That night allowed me to realize many things, one of them being what made you tick, anger. If you weren't so good at killing, I'd have removed you from Anbu by now. Kakashi stood up after hearing that, letting the first of his emotions show. Well, what did you expect? His voice raised. I was in over my depth, I was hunting him under your orders, and when I had the snake trapped I froze. I wasn't ready. He felt like punching something, anything to relieve this anger. You're angry? He questioned. You never get unfazed, you rarely show emotion in the midst of a fight, let alone a stale conversation about the past. He was working the man up, but he had to if he hoped to achieve his goal. Kakashi was now pacing the room. Don't act stupid with me, I know where this is going. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't even showing that much rage. What the man was showing, however, was something far worse, anxiety. He had spent years of blocking out and forgetting his past. This was causing him harm and needed to be fixed, thus this conversation was happening. The cage remained seated, unfazed by his ninja's actions. I'm not acting stupid. You had Orochimaru trapped, cornered, and all it took was to finish him. You had the hard part done. That in itself isn't the problem. Those words made Kakashi stop pacing the room, turning around to look at him in shock. I didn't expect you to kill Orochimaru, he was an experienced ninja, one of the Sannin. You had just become a man, the problem was how he stopped you. When you had the snake caught, the method of execution in place, he was able to stop you with just a stare. The malice in his eyes was enough to stop you dead in your tracks, with that he escaped. Kakashi remained silent. He had nothing to say to that or argue back, for it was true. We'll come back to that point later. He was putting everything into picture for Kakashi, letting him know exactly what he was thinking and why he came to this conclusion. There was a long silence in the room. It was clear that Hiruzen was waiting for Kakashi to speak, to comment on what he had just said. So what? His voice was back to normal, this being monotone. Where are you going with this? You weren't mad at me failing to kill him, as you couldn't either, so what is the meaning of this conversation? It was the first time since the conversation started that the Hokage let out a chuckle, albeit a dry one, devoid of any humor. We Kage are looked upon foremost as ninja, then as protectors and finally as a symbol. Our Shaddai was a symbol of peace, Nidain was a symbol of wisdom and I, a symbol of the will of fire. However, what everyone forgets, whether it be the highest ranking Anbu or the simple civilian, it's that we are people too. While speaking he had got up and walked over to the pictures of the previous cage. Kakashi was hanging on to his every word. He looked at each picture with fondness in his eyes before hardening his gaze. A cage has to bear an awful burden, one that I would wish on nobody. However, when I die I need somebody to take this position off my hands, somebody that I trust, somebody I respect and most importantly, somebody young, that isn't afraid to make a change. He was still looking away from the man, but he could feel his body shaking. Kakashi knew where he was going with this. He let out another puff of smoke. I practically raised 3 students to take this position off my hands. Jiraiya would rather die than take it, he is too free-spirited and I don't think I need to explain the other two to you. One would probably maim me if I even asked her, and the other would kill me before I got the chance. That's why I called you here. Before he could say any more the Anbu captain cut across him. Uncharacteristically his voice was frantic. You know I would do anything you order me to, but the position of Hokage. I'm not deserving of it. I've never been able to do anything right with my life, it was my fault Obito died, I couldn't even keep his dying wish. He had to stop to settle his voice. Even after all that I thought I had changed, I thought I was stronger, I could still only watch as Minato-sensei lost his life. Even now I can't be the friend to his legacy like I promised I would. Finishing his sentence Kakashi slumped back into the chair, a feeling of nausea coming over him due to the strong negative feelings. Hiruzen turned around to look at him, silencing any other words that could escape his mouth with the severity of his gaze. What's done is done Kakashi, and don't get ahead of yourself either, in the state you are in you wouldn't be fit for the position. You have spent the majority of your years depressed, every time you look to be recovering a loved one has been tragically taken from you. Since Minato's death you have turned into a hermit, you haven't made any progression, and instead have spent your free time reminiscing about the past, preferring to live in it than the present day. He let his words sink in, making it clear he didn't improve. Guy tells me he barely sees you anymore, and Tenzo simply doesn't see you. Okage-sama, you know all too well that I have been working for the village, doing mission after mission to protect it. Hiruzen's stern gaze scrunched, silencing the retort. I don't believe a word of it. I don't mind that you do missions, I find it warming that you feel so strong toward serving the village. His voice was laced with sarcasm. What I do mind is that you have cut all bonds with your friends, and before you start I warn you to not. There is no excuse to breaking those bonds, especially how you have treated them over the years. Kakashi just leaned back in his chair. He didn't appreciate being spoken to like a child, but he knew it was true. He had all but cut his bonds with his friends, preferring to spend the little time between missions at the memorial stone or locked in his house. So you want me to spend more time with those around me? His eyes widened as the cogs in his brain put 2 and 2 together. If you want me to become a jounin for the simple reason of friendship, I decline. We agreed that I would stay in Anbu a few more years. In all honesty it wasn't like he had meant to cut his bonds, he just did. He took mission after mission for months. Those months turned to years, and before he knew it he was here. The reason for this was simple, being focused and adrenaline-fueled, something that only missions could provide, numbed the memories of the past. Let me tell you exactly why I brought you here and why I have told you everything that I have. He waved his hand signaling for Anbu in the room to leave. He wanted to keep the rest of this private for Kakashi's sake. You were a child when you became a genin, his voice was mellow and low, not a year later you made chunin at 6. It would be another 6 years you spent your time training hard and shattering every record there was until you reached the rank of jounin at 12. I'm sure you remember the talk of the village. You were her poster boy, the people loved you. A small smile came to his face. I particularly remember being awoken when you decided to train near the Sarutobi compound. We were at least 5 minutes walk away, but you could still hear your group of fans. He noticed the small smile behind his Kakashi's masked face before continuing. No matter who it was, be it Danzo or a civilian, everyone expected great things from you. The last Haddock, the prodigal son of Tsukumo, you had already begun to pick up reputation nicknames when your friends were fresh genin or newly made chunin, and then it went all downhill. Obito died, then Rin, and finally Minato. Each time you got over one another fell, and by the last of it you were but a shell of your former self, ability-wise and in personality. This finally brings this long, boring and in your case emotional talk full circle. He was getting to the end of this discussion. This next bit would be hard, but it was for his own good. Now let's take a step back and look what we're left with. An old man past his prime and in over his head at a job he's no longer qualified for, and a young man who is a shell of his former self. He has all the ability in the world, but no longer has the motivation and is lost in his memories. We are very similar Kakashi, although you don't know it, we are weary, tired, and we both have underachieved in our life. But unlike me, you still have time in this world, you are 23, the world is yours to shape. You have the intelligence, cunning, and there has never been a more skilled ninja to come through our shinobi system, and for that reason I'm placing you on leave. But that he turned his back to make his leave, in his mind the conversation was over. Slowly lifting his head after looking nowhere but the ground, Kakashi appeared to be unaffected by the news, however his shaking voice suggested otherwise. What is the meaning of this? What are you trying to do? The Hokage didn't stop walking but did respond, his voice suggesting that what he had just done was as mundane as a deer ank. You have 3 years, Kakashi. In that time you are to make amends to the people of the village. You are to repair the bonds that have been broken and you are to train. You are strong, but you haven't even scratched your potential. I don't care what your motivation is or what you decide to train for, whether it be to protect your friends, the village or to become what everyone thought you would, what Obito, Rin and Minato-kun thought. This time Kakashi did react, eyes widened and a gleam in his eye that had not been present for years. Then what after the 3 years are up? The Hokage had opened the door, but stopped to answer. After the 3 years are over I will test you, personally. If you pass, you will take this title off me. You are my choice, Kakashi, I will choose you to surpass me just like I chose your sensei. With that he left the room, well aware of how much scrutiny he would receive for removing arguably the village's best Anbu. He sat still, plastered to his seat, not trusting his legs to carry him. It felt like a heavy weight had been lifted off his shoulders. For the first time since his sensei's death, he felt as if he had a purpose, like he had something to work towards. It was time to become the shinobi he was meant to be. It's about time I got a rematch, although it's always a little nerve-wracking going up against Sasuke, Naruto thought to himself as he was stationed in the center of the training field in the Standard Academy defensive stance. It had actually been an enjoyable day so far, sitting beside Sasuke was a lot more fun than anyone else, for the simple reason that he was left to himself. To think of it, that was probably why Sasuke chose to sit beside him, he was the only one that didn't fuss over the Uchiha, and because he didn't try to engage in conversation he was easily ignored. That was another thing, he knew it was his time to fight the Uchiha again, he had been keeping count and he was well aware that his adversary was doing the same. Despite not admitting it, they both looked forward to this. Sasuke was the only one that challenged him, and the same could be said for the Uchiha. Some of the others could keep up, but never push them. He had his left foot far forward and his right foot behind him. His loose fists mirrored this while he was facing sideways. Breaking his locking eyes of Sasuke, he noticed that his arms were shaking. He always did get excited before a fight like this. He could tell Sasuke's were too. Are both fighters ready? Iruka was standing at the sidelines with the other students. He was well aware that the majority of them were anticipating the fight with eyes peeled. Any other fight, any other matchup there was always cheers and encouraging shouting. When he and Sasuke matched up it was silence, the only thing heard was the sound of flesh meeting flesh or the name of a jutsu. Naruto let a small smirk come to his face. Sasuke mirrored the smirk, only adding a nod. Naruto Uzumaki vs Sasuke Uchiha. Hajime. As the fight started the atmosphere only got tenser, both fighters refusing to make the first move, sizing each other up and not giving anything away. As if on an unspoken command both he and Sasuke sprung forward. Meeting in the middle of the field, Sasuke threw a fast punch, forcing him to dodge before rolling to the side, evading a kick that was centimeters from making contact. You've gotten faster, but so have I. Naruto pushed off the ground, closing the already short distance at blinding speed and punching Sasuke directly on the throat, the force of the hit pushing him back. If Sasuke experienced any pain he did a good job hiding it. Barely coming to a stop before hitting the student spectators, he immediately dashed towards him going with a sliding kick, forcing him to jump over it. While sliding under him he reached up grabbing his ankle and twisting, sending a sharp pain through his leg and pulling it with his momentum. It didn't take him too long to kick free and he returned with a vicious kick directed to his still crouched face. Although blocked at bottom time. He gave his leg a few kicks trying to get the pain out of it. Out of the two he was probably faster, but it was only slightly. Sasuke however made that up in his technique and reflexes. He could turn every situation against his opponent delivering blows that would wear them down, if not cripple them in a real fight. He was lucky to avoid these so far, his speed being the only thing saving him as he could kick out before the majority of damage was done. He smirked, so, we're going all out straight away, huh? I'm fine with that. The smirk turned to a wicked smile. He wasted no time kicking off at top speed, none of the other students could track him, effectively losing sight of him before he appeared before Sasuke, delivering a fist to the face. He followed up with fast punches and swinging kicks, all of them being aimed at the upper torso and head, but Sasuke had compassed himself, blocking each one with a rigid armor dodging. He kept this up, pushing the Uchiha back until Sasuke ducked under an uppercut before effectively landing his own. Naruto stumbled back, open legs keeping him on his feet. Not being given any time, Sasuke responded with his own combination of attacks, preferring to aim punches to his head and kicks at his lower body. All it takes, he rolled forward, dodging under the blonde's punch, to stop a fly. He pushed the back of Naruto's leg, bringing him to his knees, as to remove the wings. Each word was backed up with an elbow to his right leg. He stifled the pain in his voice, or you can just squash it. He drew his arm back and with all the strength he could muster, lunged forward, the initial force of the punch, sending Sasuke smashing through a training dummy before coming to a stop along the ground, a small shallow trench in his wake. They both rose again to their full height. Naruto now supporting a limping leg and Sasuke having his face covered in blood from the nose down. Give up, Naruto. The voice wasn't one of ignorance or superiority, just confidence in his ability to win. You can't beat me, not without your speed. It was true, Sasuke had targeted his main asset. When he was in hand-to-hand combat with the Uchiha they were matched in strength, but when Sasuke advanced in technique, he made up for in speed. That didn't mean he was a one-trick pony though. He pulled out 2 kunai, one in each hand before inspecting himself. It wasn't as bad as it looked, he could still move pretty fast although it would hurt. Responding in his own way he decided to dash forward in a zigzagging pattern, his unchanged speed catching Sasuke off guard. Before he got too close he jumped high into the air, throwing both kunai to the left and right of Sasuke. He could tell he was about to get another taunt, but his smirk must have gave his plan away. Knowing better Sasuke moved directly back and not a second later, where he stood was sliced down by at least an inch, leaving a clean cut between the 2 kunai. He landed gracefully, biting down a groan at the pain in his leg from the small fall. He made a loud clicking noise. You're not the only one that can use ninja wire. Although it was a little bit of an extreme move, there had been worse in previous bars between the two. Last time Sasuke had actually pulled the exact same move on him and he didn't dodge, he was pretty sure he was still feeling pain from somewhere because of it. Standing at the side Iruka could only let out a sigh. Why is it that every time they fight they have to try and at least maim each other? It had gotten to the point where he was considering banning the two from fighting one another, their fights always got out of hand and sometimes had to be intervened. It looked like today was going to be another one of those days. There was a thin sheen of sweat running down Sasuke's back after that last attack. He had forgotten all about using it and never suspected the blonde to copy him. He scolded himself for the mistake. Naruto was a ninja through and through. He wasn't above fighting dirty, he wasn't above stealing another's jutsu, and yet if one were to ask, you would say he liked to rely off his own power. Ultimately however, he just cared about winning. He somewhat agreed with that mentality, but he wouldn't be winning today. He's still fast and it's too much off a gamble for Taijutsu, it could go either way, looks like it's time to bring out the jutsu. Sasuke charged forward, while running he went through hand seals before shouting, fire release. Grand fireball jutsu. Ignoring the shock of the crowd, Iruka included, he kept up his barrage by throwing numerous kunai and shuriken through the ball of flames. It wouldn't kill his opponent, but it would definitely hurt. There was no doubt in his mind that he had ended the fight, he had been practicing that one for a while now, making sure that it was right. For his first time using it in combat it was a good size. The shocked look of Naruto before he fired the jutsu told him everything he needed to know, thus he came to this conclusion. He turned around to walk away, the dobe was in over his head, although he was a good challenge at first. Unknowingly a small frown was present on his face. Sasuke, you stupid prick. You don't know how much shit you've just got me in because of that. He had really messed up, he should have let the fireball hit him and dealt with the pain. Now the Hokage was really gonna get angry with him. When he saw the fireball approach him he was shocked, he didn't know Sasuke could do any jutsu, bar the standard academy ones, so when he saw a fireball of that size roaring towards him, his mind had turned off and his reflexes kicked in. That's why a perfectly unharmed him came into view of Sasuke and the rest of the crowd, with a reinforced ceiling tag floating in front of him. Needless to say, his skills in Fuinjutsu had progressed since the Hokage let it slip. He was always making tags, trying to get better and more experienced with them, so it was a normal thing for him to be carrying one. Sasuke turned around, a full smirk now adorning his face. Oh, so the orphan wants more. He had never been so thrilled for a spar. He didn't get to just cut loose anymore like he could when the clan was around, to fight until he could fight no more. If he kept going like this his ambition would no doubt be achieved. Naruto responded with a smile, one that was true. Time to kick your ass and get a promotion. Bring it, mommy's boy. With that he threw the used tag behind him, causing it to blow up in a ball of flames. He was a sucker for dramatics and apparently making faulty tags. Chapter 4, A Night to Remember. Naruto age 12. Naruto sprawled himself along the back decks off the academy classroom, arms clasped behind him to rest his head. At first glance one would think he was simply relaxing, but he was far from relaxed. I didn't sit through 4 kami-forsaken years of history that I was already knowledgeable in to wait another 4 for our sensei. He started tapping his legs showing his impatience. The last 3 years had been much like the first one. They did history, chakra theory and then sparred. Of course there had been the extra stuff like learning the 3 standard jutsu and branching into other arts like stealth and setting traps, but it was all pretty simple. Life had continued as always, his landlord was still much the same, if not more weary after Sarutobi's lecture. To think of it, the only interesting thing that happened was Mizuki trying to pull one over on him. The chunin teacher had tried the method of bribing by promising to teach him a powerful jutsu, but only if he was able to steal and deliver the scroll of seals as payment. To put it simply, it didn't work, in fact his plan had backfired, horribly. Even if he had a brain made of brass, his years living it rough had taught him to detect a lie. Although he wasn't complaining, he got a handy technique called the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, so it was a win-win situation for both sides. After all, Mizuki stated that he hated the village and wanted to leave Konoha, albeit it was minus the scroll and with a few internal injuries, but still, he had been granted his wishes, a win-win situation indeed. That had only happened a little over a month ago, just after his graduation where he, yes he, got Rookie of the Year. Damn, I'm awesome. He would have preferred to say that he destroyed Sasuke on the long trek to the coveted title, but he couldn't. It was a close call, both were gunning for it, but neither would admit it. He aced his written exam getting a solid 100%, while Sasuke got 96. He hit 9 out of 10 targets with both kunai and shuriken. Sasuke got a perfect score. Apart from that they drew equal on everything else, meaning it had to be decided in a spar, and again, although he didn't admit it, he was lucky to win said spar. Sasuke had beaten him in their previous encounter, and he had just managed to get the victory in this one by swarming the field in regular bunshin. Although he had too much chakra to make 2 or 3, he could easily make 100 or more. With this knowledge he spammed the field keeping Sasuke blinded while he delivered vital hits, even then it was still too close. After the victory Sasuke hadn't been too happy. It didn't help how he kept repeating that defeat as a learning process. Why do I have to be in a team with you of all people? You're just going to keep me and Sasuke come back. The huffing voice of a certain Yamanaka cut through his head. Of all the people to get he still couldn't believe his divine unluckiness. He sat up, a look of confusion on his face. I really shouldn't have to put up with this. Traditionally, every year the top rookie gets paired with the dead last and the Kunoichi of the year. It has been like that for the past 40 high and mighty righteous prosperous loving. You get the point years, but Kami said, you know what, fuck that guy and gave me you too. You didn't get the Kunoichi of the year, either did Duck Boy over there. He sent a cheeky grin to Sasuke which earned him a curse. By the way, how does me being rookie of the year equal slowing you 2 lovebirds down? That last comment earned him another curse which he responded with a comical thumbs up. He had just let off a lot of steam with that, hence the reason he never really took to Ino, nor her to him. The two just didn't mix well, she was bossy and he hated being bossed around. Another point was that she always looked down on him, she just saw him as some no-name orphan who had an inflated ego, plus the opinion of her parents probably didn't help. Her father was a good man, loyal and a great ninja, then again, everyone knew that his civilian wife had him wrapped around her finger. He probably didn't mind her befriending him when they were younger, but nearly all the civilians disliked him in some shape or form. With Mrs. Yamanaka wearing the pants of the house, it was clear that Ino already had a negative mindset from the get-go, never giving. He shrugged his shoulders, meh. By now he had learned to live with it. He would always be at a disadvantage in terms of reputation, but that didn't stop him from being curious. When he was younger and more fragile he had just accepted it, now however he knew there had to be a reason. He was sure he would get to the bottom of it eventually, but for now it was all hypothesis. For hours this time it was Sasuke who interrupted his piece, the usual low voice hinting frustration. How long does it take for somebody to get from one end of the village to the other? He's either late on purpose or just plain stupid. The sentence hadn't even finished leaving his mouth before the classroom door was swung open, revealing a tall, silver-haired jounin. Well, that's what they assumed considering his standard shinobi uniform. I haven't even met my team, and one of them has already made fun of my intelligence. Not a great start, is it? If he was annoyed by the fact he didn't show it, his voice was lazy and unrefined, giving them the impression he really didn't want to be here. Now, let's see what we have. He spent a few moments taking in each of them with one judging eye that made it all too clear he had already formed an opinion. The spoiled prince of Konoha and an equally spoiled clan heir, then I have you. His shoulders slumped and a sweat drop appeared when he took in Naruto's sleeping form. Not 3 years ago and he could make a root ninja waver like a leaf, now he was struggling with academy students. Shoulders still slumped he drowned out, meet me on the academy rooftop and for your own good, make it snappy. With that he disappeared in a puff of smoke, making it clear to all that he was just a bunshin. They sat in silence, one of them shocked at how quickly they had been thrust into this situation. Well, let's go. Ino's loud scream seemed to have no effect on the pair. Sasuke slowly rose from his seat before walking out the door, hands in pockets. "I'm not going to let some jumped-up cyclops get in my head," he finished just before leaving the classroom. As per usual routine, her reflexes kicked, causing her to scurry after Sasuke like a lost puppy. However, she did spare one last glance at the blonde. "Baka, hurry up." He paid her no mind, instead he was back in his resting position, eyes closed and all. Damn it, Naruto, we're a team now. It was up to her to sort this out. Not thinking twice, she walked over and, deciding to ignore his peacefully sleeping form, roughly grabbed Naruto by the ear with one hand and covered his mouth with the other before dragging him along behind her. "You're such a hassle, Naruto." Contrary to her words, she did let a slight smile cross her face at his muffled screams. "I wonder how long it'll take before they come here to complain." The aged Cage looked to the corner of the room, seemingly at nothing. "What do you think, Boar, within the next 10 minutes or perhaps later?" There was a short moment of silence where the hidden Anbu was wondering whether or not he should answer. It was against protocol to make a sound. Then again, it wasn't very often the Cage even acknowledged the Anbu in the room, apart from the occasional wave of his hand telling them to leave. Letting out an audible sigh at being put into this situation, he gave an honest answer. "No sir, I think the elders will be here sooner." The people of Konoha really did know when to make an entrance. Not a second after the words left the Anbu's mouth, Sarutobi heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door before it was swung open, leaving a handle-sized crack in the wall. His ex-teammates Himura Midokado and Kaharu Utatane often did have a bad temper. He assumed this was why they were both red with anger and had just slammed their hands onto his desk, demanding to know the meaning behind the team change. "What is the meaning of this, Hiruzen? I thought we agreed on the genin teams." Himura never was one for giving him respect. "You really picked a bad year for this, Sarutobi. It is important that the clan heirs get partnered with the right people. We had gave you the best combination, but you went and changed it." Contrary to popular belief, not all old ladies forced cookies and milk into their grandkids. If ever there was a person he truly detested, it was Kaharu, and she had only gotten worse in her old age. He set his pipe on his desk and clasped his hands in front of him. "It appears you were correct, Boar. They were indeed here sooner than expected." 4 years ago he had made a change to the way he ruled. He refused to be bullied by the elders and council any longer. He had been trusted to look after the village, but instead other people were doing the job. He was just finalizing their wills and wants. He had been trusted this title for a reason, not Homura, not Kaharu, and not Danzo, him, Hiruzen Sarutobi. He had made mistakes and admittedly he had failed at the job, but reputation be damned, he was going to put in a hell of a good finish. It was again Kaharu who spoke up, a look of disgust on her face. "These past 4 years have been tough for us having to deal with you after your change, but this is a new extreme. To go ahead and change genin teams without our approval at the last minute. I will not stand for this." The elder Sarutobi responded in his typical light-hearted tone, "By all means, please, have a seat." Seeing that the duo were about to explode at his response, he hardened his face and adopted the voice that every Cage knew. "Before you even start to disrespect me again, I warn you, just because we were once teammates and friends, doesn't mean I'm above throwing you two into T&I. You are no different from the rest of the ninja in this village, therefore you will be treated similarly for such acts. If you had treated Minato in any way close to what you have me, he would have been rid of you years ago. I kept you out of goodwill, out of friendship, but recently I have been stressed, so please, do not make this harder for me." If the tone and severity of his words wasn't enough, his gaze definitely would have been. It was the look he would give an enemy. As one might expect, the two elders were left speechless. Deciding to put the confrontation at rest for now, they both took a seat and waited for him to speak. He wasn't going to rush himself, instead preferring to do what he always did when faced with a conversation that would no doubt give him a migraine by the time it was finished. He went through the usual routine and lit his pipe, this time taking a puff before he even got started. He then took it out of his mouth, holding it in his hand and savoring the sensation of peace before the verbal storm took place. He loved these moments of serenity. He took another puff, well aware of the forming tick marks on his guests. "Now, where are we?" He glanced at them both, making it clear he didn't want interrupted during his explanation. "Ah, yes. I believe you wanted an explanation or my reasoning to change the teams." He reached into the top drawer of his desk and pulled out the document furthest to the front. He was prepared for this conversation. Placing it on the desk, it showed a picture of each academy student along with their final grades upon graduation. "I am one for long-winded explanations, so I'll try to make this one short and simple." He pointed at each of the students in discussion. "I'll give a brief overview of the students. Here we have Sakura Haruno, who we originally agreed to be on Team 7. She has an excellent brain, good at strategy, and shows the right aspects to become a medic nin or genjutsu specialist. Whether she pursues this or not is up to her." Without lifting his lowered head from the document, he held up his hand, stopping the spew of words that promised to come forth. Next we have Sasuke Uchiha, shows all-round talent when it comes to being a shinobi, his only weakness being his inability to cooperate in genjutsu, but as I'm sure you know, the former can be cured through time and the latter when he unlocks his dojutsu. He handed the two files over to the elders. It wasn't long before they nodded their head, acknowledging what he said was correct. To finish what was supposed to be Team 7, we have Naruto Uzumaki. He ignored the scowl that crossed their face at the mention of his name. As I'm sure you remember, he exceeds in most of the arts, but is more natural when it comes to ninjutsu. Although I keep telling him to stop, he also seems to be quite fond of Hyuninjutsu, and his sensei, Iruka, has personally told me that he lives up to the name Uzumaki. You can take from that what you will. Where he falls though appears to be genjutsu. Because of his condition, it is unlikely that he will ever be able to perform the art, although he is highly capable of dispelling them. He stopped the explanation and leaned back in his chair, making it clear that they were free to talk. It would do no good to continue on to the next bit without explaining this first. Not wasting any time, it was Hamura who spoke up in a calm but confused tone. I don't understand, the three students that you have mentioned fit together perfectly, they complement each other in many ways, and the only possible hindrance would be Sakura's attitude and Sasuke not getting on with Naruto. However, in your new team, these are problems anyway. He didn't like this at all, not just the fact that Hiruzen had done something as important as this without informing him, but mainly because there wouldn't be another generation of the Ino Shikacho formation, something that was so important to the village during the last war. Hiruzen internally smirked. He hadn't just made this change on a whim, he had his reasons, and they were good ones. You are correct, Hamura-san, but if you look at Ino Yamanaka's file, she has the exact same attributes as Sakura, the only difference being that she seems to be more skilled with the herbal side of the arts, rather than book smarts. He saw that Hamura was about to interrupt him, but he again rose his hand, already knowing what the man was about to ask. I am well aware that this reason alone is not enough to make such an influential change. After all, I am breaking the famed Ino Shikacho formation. The second reason is the two's personalities. Sakura is persistent and strong-willed, excellent traits for any ninja. Ino, however, shares these traits. Additionally, and what has made me change the teams is her bossy streak. The look on the two elders' face was that of stupefaction. They clearly didn't think this was enough of a reason. He gained his usual smile. Now, let me explain this. Leaning over his desk, he retrieved all the documents he had handed out before positioning them in a way that they were easily in his view. Consider everything about Naruto and Sasuke and do well to remember exactly who they are, how they act around one another, and most important, how they have changed each other. The way the duo acted around one another amused him. The strange relationship verging on hatred of each other had caused Sasuke to respect the blonde. He shook his head, dismissing the thoughts before moving on with the explanation. After much internal debate, I decided to break the traditional Team 7 lineup, ignoring the unwritten rule of the Kunoichi of the Year, the Rookie of the Year, and the Dead Last being paired together. Now remember that we all agreed on one thing, that Naruto and Sasuke had to be paired together for the simple reason that they wouldn't be happy anywhere else. Unbeknownst to them, they are the closest both have to friends. They are too uncivil, each lacking the social skills to care about the other's feelings. Well, this would drive anyone else apart, it strangely brings them together. He continued speaking, ignoring the questions both wanted to ask. I'm not fool enough to think that would be enough though. His chirpy voice turned serious. Friendship is the key to success for this team, and if history has taught us anything, it's that they don't always last. So we have two boys, both of which are important for multiple reasons. If we put them with anyone else they wouldn't be happy. If we put them together, they will no doubt come to blows if left unchecked. He stopped, letting the information sink in, taking a puff of his pipe as he did so before delivering the final blow for his argument. Do you really think Sakura Haruno would be enough to pull these two together? He smiled upon seeing their expressions. Both had lowered heads and scrunched eyes, telling him that they knew where he was going with the explanation. It also made it clear that they hated the fact he was right. You see, Ino has a stubborn streak in her that will bond this team. I'm not saying there won't be rough patches, but as she grows, so will her personality. She's too stubborn to be bossed around, even by Sasuke. She will eventually create equality, a neutral viewpoint where the others would be biased to their own. She is the perfect choice, the only choice, and may I add Kakashi's choice. In the Kage's mind, it was all too clear why Kakashi wanted someone like Ino in the team. After all, Ino was very similar to Rin. Ah, you pig. I'm pretty sure you broke my right eardrum. Now on the academy roof, the newly formed Team 7 were having the first of many arguments. Stupid. She tried to punch the blonde only for him to duck. You don't break your eardrum, and I didn't even pull it that hard, besides you deserved it for sleeping. With a disbelieving face he chirped back while still dodging punches. I was not sleeping, just resting my eyes. What? I was bored and that desk is actually pretty comfy. While the dumb blondes were about to start a brawl, Sasuke could only roll his eyes. Sitting down with his hands in his pockets, he looked up at his new sensei who was mirroring the position. "You not gonna stop them before they involve me in this?" Kakashi responded with a typical eye smile. "From past experience, I always find that it's best if you sort your own problems, especially since you lot are now a team." His mind pondered on the last bit of his new student's question. "What makes you think you'll get dragged into it?" He was generally curious. Sasuke took his hand out of his pockets, leaned back and used them to hold himself upright before sighing. "It's Naruto. What do you expect? Ino, don't do it." The sound of a soft thud was heard, making it all too clear that Ino had finally hit her target. The groan that followed made it clear that the aim of said thud had hit a sweet spot. Hands on her hip and confident smirk plastered to her face, she said, "That's what you get for calling me meat, baka." Although it didn't hurt too much, Naruto definitely wouldn't be letting that happen again. She's got more power in her arm than you think, but still, not enough. If she was hoping to keep up with him and Sasuke, she would have to step up her game. That made him think, I wonder. She wasn't past standing up for herself, that was for sure. Come to think of it, in the past he had always made fun of her infatuation of Sasuke, which never got too much of a reaction. However, the one time he actually makes fun of her, she had gotten quite angry at him. Maybe she's not a complete loss. Naruto, Ino, hurry up. He decided listening to his new pupil's advice would be beneficial for all. He hadn't even done anything with them yet, and they had already come to blows. Seeing that his new sensei was patiently waiting for them, he hopped up before sitting opposite Sasuke. Ino had followed him, although she didn't have much of a choice, considering he grabbed a hold of her arm. Seeing his three students seated in front of him with Ino in the middle caused Kakashi gave his typical eye smile. "Well, now that you pair have finished touching each other up," he ignored Naruto's blank glare, "I think it's time for an introduction." Seeing his students give no reaction, he again drooped his shoulders loosely. You're going to be a lot of work, I can already tell. Let me give you an example. My name is Kakashi Haddock, my likes are I can't really think of any. My dislikes are traitors and my dreams for the future, I don't feel like telling you." He finished by pointing to Ino. "Okay, you're next, piggy." She was in disbelief. "That didn't even tell us anything." She was being held back by both Naruto and Sasuke, "And then you called me piggy." Being the type of guy Naruto is, he replied, "Well, it is quite a fitting name as Sakura called you that since before the academy." Even while restraining the ball of anger that was Ino, he was unable to detect the danger. With her rage turned to Naruto, she again punched him in the sweet spot. Ignoring his low groans, she reverted back to her normal happy self. "Fine. My name is Ino Yamanaka. My likes are flowers and other pretty things as well as my family. My dislikes are idiots and people who take things too seriously. I have two goals in life, one of them is to be with the man of my dreams, and the other is to surpass my father to become the strongest Yamanaka clan head." She was well aware of how the others reacted to her. Yes, she was girly, yes, she disliked conflict, but that didn't mean the life of a ninja was taken for granted. She was the heir of the Yamanaka clan, she knew all about being a ninja, despite what others may think. Kakashi just gave the typical eye smile, not letting his impressed thoughts show. Who knew the girl already had such a drive? I guess she won't be as much work as I initially thought. Not wasting a second, he pointed toward Sasuke. "Go on, Sasuke, you're next." Leaning forward, he clasped his hands in front of himself. "My name is Sasuke Uchiha, my likes are training and that's it. My dislikes are," he looked towards Naruto. "My dream for the future, no, my ambition is to avenge my family." He left it at that. Thanks to Naruto constantly making fun of him, it was no secret what his ambition was. This time Kakashi did let his surprise show. To think that he's changed that much, everyone always said he was revenge obsessed. Obviously, he still held major hatred for that man, but it wasn't anywhere near as bad as he thought it would be. "Who would have thought I would be pleasantly surprised coming out of this, those two will still need some work, but not anywhere near as much as I thought. Hopefully Naruto would be T. Stop zoning out like that, you damn Cyclops, we want to get started on something important." His glazed over eyes slowly came back into focus only to see Naruto leaning back, legs and arms crossed looking thoroughly relaxed, however he didn't look too happy. "Oh, you're in a rush. That's quite hypocritical coming from the guy that was sleeping earlier." That's not the way I see it." He scratched the back of his head before shoving his hands into his pockets. "Time sleeping is time well spent. It means I'm resting, which allows me to train harder. Sitting here watching you and knowing all too well what you're thinking about just wastes time, and by the way, I'm a completely different barrel of fish than these two." He gave a challenging smirk to finish. Kakashi locked eyes his with those all too familiar blue. "That's quite a statement, Naruto, please, enlighten us." He could see that the boy meant every word of what he said. Maybe later, so are we gonna do something or quit with this gimmick? These two know me and I'm sure you've did research." He knew exactly who he was talking to and also a little about him. The silver-haired Jounin withheld a laugh. "You're exactly like your old man Naruto." It was frightening. Although his father wasn't as brash or as rude or as mean. Now that he thought about it, they were really different, so why did Naruto remind him so much of the famed ninja? He gave him a piercing look, so you want to get started. I was originally going to save this test for tomorrow so you would be well prepared and rested, but sure, we can do it now. The three genin couldn't help but shift uncomfortably when their sensei's gaze became predatory. He swatted a branch out of his way before jumping down from a tree. I really got to stop trash talking to people stronger than me. He had a goal that he must complete and it was already getting dark. Damn Kakashi, how can I do this? After the team was introduced, Kakashi had revealed that he wasn't planning to test them until the next day. Of course, after his little outburst that all changed. They were taken to training ground 7 and told 3 words upon arrival. Endure to persevere. That was all they were told before their new sensei started unleashing powerful punches and kicks. He still didn't know the meaning behind this, but he and the others had picked up that it was a test. What they were competing for, they still didn't know, but Kakashi was the predator and they were the prey, that much was clear. After the initial surprise, they were able to work together for an escape. He was able to create a fodder army of cage bunshin, which bought them a little time. Although weak, they still had kunai and shuriken, so if left unchecked, they could do damage to the experienced jounin. Surprisingly, Sasuke had backed him up in their retreat. He fired off a few fire jutsu, and although they were evaded, they did what was necessary and slowed him down. As for Ino, she couldn't really do much. She didn't have the long-range techniques of the other two besides her basic clan jutsu, and it was too much of a risk if she missed. The good thing Sasuke talked her out of trying it was likely she would miss against someone like Kakashi. After that, Kakashi had managed to catch up to them despite their efforts, and they had been split up in order to evade him. He had acted as a distraction by creating around 30 cage bunshin before hinging them into each member of Team 7 while the other two ran on. He still didn't know how he got out of that. He knew exactly who Kakashi was and more importantly, how strong he was. Despite everything, he knew that Kakashi was out of their league. Even with the 3 of them, they didn't have a chance, which meant either one of 2 things. They weren't meant to pass the test or beating Kakashi wasn't the goal. While running across the forest floor, he looked up at the now star-filled sky. It's going to be next to impossible to find them now, let alone beat Kakashi. A trained ninja could use the shadows to his advantage, they could not. He continued walking along the forest floor, making sure not to make too much noise, although it was hard to see he could make out most things if he tried. He really didn't know what he was doing. There was dead silence around him and no sign of anyone. Was the task over or would it just keep going until they completed the unknown objective? What the hell am I suppose the words caught in his mouth when he barely made out a string of figures standing in the distance. Letting curiosity get the better of him, he slowly crept forward trying to get close enough to make them out. It didn't take too long before he figured out what was going on. I see, well, at least I know that much. Standing in the distance were Kakashi's cage bunshin in a straight line. He was able to look up and down it, noticing that it followed the boundary line of the training ground. I can only assume he has them surrounding the entire training ground, looks like we're penned in anyway. Although you would think otherwise, that information made him breathe a little easier. Knowing that the real Kakashi was somewhere in the training ground hunting him down like an animal, immediately reversed these positive thoughts. Sigh, I really gotta think of a plan. It's obvious I can't escape, and I definitely can't win against him. Naruto stopped walking as he let his voice trail off, the sound of twigs cracking behind him until his voice again rang out. If you want to keep all your limbs attached, I would stop moving forward because Kami helped me. I will beat your ass to Suna and back. Idiot, it's me, Sasuke. Naruto looked around to get an eyeful of the Uchiha. It's about time you show. Without warning, Naruto spun around and flung a pebble hitting Sasuke directly on the stomach. He smirked when he saw Sasuke keel over. Good, you're actually Sasuke. He walked back and pulled his teammate to his feet. Sorry, you can never be too sure with Kakashi and his cage bunshin. The fact that Naruto said that with a smile and a chirpy voice before walking away really wasn't convincing. So now that I've found you, we can try and take him down. I'm pretty sure I saw him heading back to the center clearing. He finished by picking up and launching the same stone back. Without knowing, Naruto dodged the pebble by leaning to the side to scratch his neck. Not noticing the disbelieving scowl on Sasuke's face, he replied, "No, we have to get Ino before we do anything." Realizing something, a puzzled look came on his face. Wait, I thought Ino was with you. Sasuke snorted. She was with me, but she couldn't keep up. Seeing Naruto's face shift to a frown made him elaborate. He really didn't need an angry Uzumaki right now. When you distracted Kakashi, me and her went left while you went right, but he only sent clones after you, and he went after us. She wasn't as fast as me, neither did she have enough stamina, so it was either leave her or get caught with her. Naruto just shook his head. Gah, and you call me an idiot. I don't know the objective of this bastard's test, but didn't you listen in history? Sasuke deadpanned. This is coming from the kid that slept through 4 full years of the thing. This time it was Naruto's turn to snort. That's because I knew it all, shitbrick. Anyway, Konoha has always heavily promoted teamwork above all else by Kakashi's 3 words that probably isn't the goal, but that doesn't mean anything. He will expect teamwork, not yearn for it. In his opinion Ino would only get in the way, but if that's what it took then so be it. Well, I had to circle the whole way around the perimeter to find you, so she's probably around 300 to 400 yards west from here. She's trapped in an earth jutsu, so she's going to need your help to get out. He nodded when he saw Naruto's questioning look. I won't be able to get her out, she's in up to the neck and I can't do any earth jutsu. The comical rain cloud appeared above Naruto's head, I can't do any jutsu. The voice was but a whisper. Really? He got beat for Rookie of the Year by this guy, then just do the weird ceiling stuff, the way you absorb fireballs and other jutsu. Naruto's frown slowly turned into a smile, yeah, ceiling will work. Naruto just waved him off before starting to walk away, yeah, whatever, I'll go get Ino, and you make sure Kakashi doesn't get to me. Don't engage him unless he's going to see me and make sure to lure him away. We don't have a hope, but we can at least try to take the Cyclops down. But that the two darted off to complete their goals. Sasuke had seen Kakashi head to the main clearing that was used for training, so he would go there and try to keep an eye on him while waiting for Naruto. If he needed to intervene he would. Knowing that Ino wasn't that far away, Naruto was tempted just to run, but he steeled himself. If Kakashi was hunting them down, then he had been lucky to evade him for this long. He didn't want to push his luck, so as usual he kept low and moved slowly. Not 10 minutes had passed until he had reached the small clearing Sasuke had told him about, and sure enough, there was Ino, quite literally stuck in the ground. He guessed it was roughly between 2 to 3 hours since he had split from the trio as a distraction, so she had been in that uncomfortable position for around the same length. He nearly felt sorry for her. Before doing anything, Naruto decided to observe his surroundings. It was quite rocky for being in the middle of the forest with a few boulders littered across the clearing. He also noticed that there was a small pond near the edge and apart from Ino that was it. I'm not stupid enough to think he'd leave her unguarded, but I don't know what to look out for. It could be a few traps littered around the area or more of his sensei's apparently limitless supply of clones. He settled his features before slowly sneaking away from his cover into the clearing, approaching from behind Ino. He could barely make out that she was awake but wasn't moving too much, that was another problem. He couldn't call her name or she'd panic before it was too late, and if a barely visible figure started approaching her, it would be even worse. Either way she'd react and their position would be given away. Meh, I never was one for planning. Deciding just to get on with it, he again started to creep forward, being careful to avoid anything noisy. At times like these, he was really glad he was gifted at stealth. Approaching Ino, he quickly darted forward and before she could react covered her mouth with his hand and leaned into her ear before whispering, "SHH, it's all good, it's me Naruto." He felt her shaking body slowly stabilize before he slowly removed his hand, allowing her the speck, "Never heard of being selfless, I nearly wet myself." The voice wasn't one of anger but more of relief. The little devil in him couldn't help but deliver the witty comeback, "Wouldn't be the first time I did that." Although he couldn't see her face, he could tell she was flustered. That's if the stuttering was anything to go by, or she was angry, probably the latter. Who was he kidding? Getting people to like him, let alone a girl, didn't happen. Deciding to relieve her of combating a response, he continued, "Relax, I'm kidding. Now, we have got you out of here." He was surprised there weren't any traps set, but he knew he wasn't out of the woods yet. "Well, in case you can't see, I'm trapped in solid rock. You're not gonna be able to dig me out," and her sentence trailed off when Naruto circled around in front of her, holding one of those tags he always used, her mind, but 2 and 2 together. "No way are you sealing me in a scroll, definitely off limits. I've seen you absorb Sasuke-kun's fire jutsu with them things." He ignored her by sitting down cross-legged. Once situated, he unfolded the sealing scroll and out popped a large bag. Of course, sealing you into that would be terrible. He took out sealing paper and ink before starting to draw on a blank piece of paper. "I've never been stored in a weapons scroll before, so I don't know what happens. What I do know, however, is that when I tried putting something else in my weapons scroll, it came back tore to pieces. For all I know, there could be no oxygen in it either, so you wouldn't be able to breathe too." He finished drawing on the paper before holding it up, making sure everything was okay with peeled eyes. Ino had somewhat calmed after hearing that. Although she really wanted out of here, she didn't want to be put into Naruto's scroll of death. Seeing that thing fire back fireballs and all of Iruka-sensei's techniques has scarred the majority of the class, so it didn't leave much to be desired. Naruto was blocking her view, but she could see that his weapons bag was filled to the brim. For someone that complains about being broke, you sure have a lot gear. Naruto briefly looked up before concentrating back to his seal. "Yeah, about 4 years ago I wandered across it. It was full to the brim with labeled sealing scrolls, and I tell you, there was a lot of scrolls. I mean, there was everything a ninja could ever need." His concentrated face let off a smile before finishing. "My guess is that it was owned by a wealthy survivalist with a hoarding complex." There was a serious amount of equipment in that bag. With it he had trained his kunai and shuriken skills for 4 years at the academy, and he had still not put a dent in his reserves. That wasn't even getting started on all the other gems that it contained. She couldn't help but let out a small chuckle at that information. So what you're saying is that you stole somebody's life collection for emergency situations. She wasn't a bit surprised. Correct. He held up the seal again, this time nodding his head in approval before slapping it on Ino's head. Of course, this sparked a rather rude reaction. What the hell are you doing? I thought you said you couldn't do that, something along the lines of being torn to pieces and no oxygen. It was funny seeing her this panicked, especially because she was trying to keep her voice quiet yet sound angry. No. I said that I wouldn't store you in the weapons pouch. This one is new and has nothing to cut you, therefore it's safe. His calm voice only further infuriated her. What about the no oxygen bit? And here she thought he was supposed to be smart. He shrugged his shoulders. It'll be fine if I do it quick. With that he placed his finger on top of the seal, and while ignoring her panicked pleas for him to stop, he sent chakra through it, and just like that, he had the Yamanaka clan heiress in the palm of his hands, literally. Oh, very good Naruto, but how are you going to get her out? The lazy and unrefined voice was his only warning, but before he had any time to react, Naruto was sent flying across the clearing, only to come to an abrupt stop against a boulder. With a groan he pulled himself out and looked up at his attacker. So that's how you're going to play. He coughed some blood into his hand before standing back to full height in front of the 3 Kakashi clones. Instead of wasting time making traps, you just sent a few clones to guard her. His voice didn't show it, but damn that hurt. The strongest punch he'd ever received was by Sasuke and they hurt, that was at least 10 times worse. Kakashi lazily flipped the scroll in the air, catching it with his other hand. Correct, but one of us may be the real Kakashi, and in that case, you don't stand a chance. Come Naruto, remember, your friend might be suffocating. Naruto's eyes widened at that, he had been completely played. Instead of just attacking him he used Ino as bait, waiting for her to be immobilized again and attacking when he wouldn't expect it. This way he was on a time limit but still fighting 3 against 1. If Kakashi expected hysteria then he would be very wrong. Instead of an expected panic or maybe even anger, his features instead settled to the usual cold frown. Fine by me. With that he darted forward at top speed, unleashing a brutal kick only for it to be blocked last second. He could tell by Kakashi's widened eyes that he wasn't expecting such speed or strength. Using this to his advantage he continued dapping punches and kicks towards the unbalanced Kakashi. Faking a kick he instead span in the air before delivery and wicked jumping punch, causing the clone to burst into a smoke. Wincing again at the pain in his stomach he briefly hunched over clutching it. What the hell is wrong? Why does it hurt so much? Ignoring the pain he took in his surroundings, he could see that both clones, standing either side of where he was, stared at him with uncharacteristic open eyes. It was clear that Kakashi wasn't expecting this strength from a fresh academy student. He slowly moved backwards to keep both clones in sight, thus allowing him to see that the left one now held the scroll. The clone I was attacking must have offloaded it at the last second. His analysis skills were usually correct. I can't say I'm surprised, you were Rookie of the Year, but still, that's very impressive speed and strength. The figure of Kakashi zipped out of sight before reappearing in front of him, but it's still not enough. Naruto again received a wicked punch catching him off guard, however this time when Naruto flew back he was caught by the other Kakashi before being slammed to the ground. The dust cleared revealing a split log. Over here patch. 10 Naruto clones charged out from the tree line wielding kunai and shuriken, while the real one had jumped over them and let out an onslaught of projectiles. Being the experienced ninja that he was, the Kakashi clones were able to easily dodge and weave out of every punch, kick and combination thrown, before swiftly dispatching them with a counterattack, whether this be a quick jab to a pressure point or something as brutal as a kunai through the throat. The sight of watching real-life moving clones of him get slaughtered really was weird, but it didn't take him too long to get used to it. The last of Naruto's clones fell and again, Kakashi's remained unharmed. Just as they were about to continue the brawl the sound of an explosion raged off in the distance. Finally getting a break Naruto's body lurched forward on impulse causing him to cough out even more blood. Again he ignored the pain, he had to get Ino soon as it had already been over 2 minutes, however he still couldn't understand how one punch had dealt that much damage. Yeah, it hurt a lot, but still, it was a punch. He wiped the blood from his mouth before commenting in haggard breath, it looks like Sasuke was right. The real you headed back to the center which means you two are clones. He was pretty certain of this fact, but confirmation was reassuring. The Kakashi clone ignored his comment, it looks like Sasuke has started using jutsu, I guess that means it's only fair if I did too. Not giving Naruto any time to react he ran through hand seals before shouting, water release. Gunshot comment. The large water ball flew towards Naruto, Kakashi didn't see the smirk on his face because he was all too prepared for this. At the last second he reached into his knee pouch and pulled out a tag, Fuinjutsu. Reflection barrier. From where the seal was thrown a blue transparent wall emerged which didn't just block the jutsu, but sent it right back catching the clone off guard and destroying it. Very good Naruto, but yet again, you've left yourself off guard. The cruel voice was all Naruto got for a warning before the other Kakashi slid towards him before shoving a kunai into his stomach. Choosing not to hear Naruto's grunt of pain, he held the back of his head, keeping it from slumping forward before digging it in deeper. You did well Naruto boo. He never finished the sentence as the figure in his hands pooped out of existence, signaling it was a clone. Before Kakashi was given a chance to think he received a powerful uppercut from directly underneath him, sourced from the hole Kakashi had made to trap Ino. His only warning, if it could even be called one, was the slight movement of earth beneath him. Momentum carrying him up, he landed on the ground awkwardly with a loud thud, causing him to stumble and fall. His stamina was superb, but fending off 3 Kakashi clones was no joke. It took all he had, and even then it felt like he was being played with. Slowly getting to his feet, he hunched over in pain, finally feeling the true effects of Kakashi's initial punch as the adrenaline wore off. This time he was forced to his knees due to the pain. Move you idiot. You have one more job. Unable to get to his feet, he weakly crawled towards the scroll. Upon reaching it he fell over, but before he succumbed to the pain he put his finger against it and said, Kai. Ino's body popped back into existence, however she wasn't moving. Before giving in he leaned over to check her pulse, and with a relieved sigh his arms collapsed on the weight of his body before his legs followed. It wasn't long before he joined Ino in succumbing to unconsciousness. One through internal injuries, the other through lack of oxygen. Hiruzen set his pipe down and crossed his hands in a disapproving manner. The elders had only just left as it took quite a bit of explaining before they were happy, or to put it correctly, could find no more faults in his decision. At first they questioned about the Ino Shikacho team formation and how it was no longer possible. That one was probably the hardest to explain, because in all honesty, Sakura was the better member for the team. Unlike Ino, she wasn't bossy, which in this case was a good thing. It would allow Shikamaru to be the tactician while the other two were the power. He also had to explain how he had already spoken to the 3 fathers and had been given the go-ahead and approval to do this, as they had initially requested their next generation to be partnered. That was the following setback: power. The elders didn't seem to think Sakura had what it takes to fill that void, but after quite a bit of persuasion, he managed to change their views. Sakura was built and acted very similarly to his own pupil Tsunade, not to mention she had extremely similar attributes and skills. He leaned forward in the desk, resting his head on his crossed arms. Yawn. It's been a long day. He wished he could just sleep, but he still had one more problem to deal with. Raising his head and stretching out his back, he waved his hand, signaling the Anbu out of the room. Facing forward he said in a weary voice, "You can come out now, Danzo." Although he couldn't see him, he felt the concealed presence slowly make itself known as the held back chakra burst forth behind him. "You always were a strange one, Danzo, but why is it that you feel necessary to stand behind me while I lecture the other two about matters they don't understand?" Danzo's voice was a drawl, bored, uncaring and monotone would be words to describe it, yet it still held a spark of urgency, causing every word to sink in. "I merely wished to avoid another feud. If I requested to stay while they were forced to leave, they would feel left out. When we would respond that it didn't involve them, they would take in as an insult, this causing a feud and wasting my time." He released a sigh. Danzo was always so direct. "So do I deserve your time? Is it about the team change?" Danzo shook his head despite knowing that the Hokage couldn't see it. "No. The decision you made was correct." That was as close as he would ever get to a compliment. Although the old cripple was a hardy bastard, he was smart. "So what do you want to talk about?" The way to deal with Danzo was to be direct. The meeting or altercation were never pleasant, so it was best to get them done and out of the way. Walking around the front of the desk, Danzo took a seat. "I want to talk about Naruto Uzumaki. It wouldn't be the first time. When the boy was young, Danzo would all but demand authority to train him, when it wasn't that he wanted to make the boy's heritage known as a means to bolster Konoha's outlook." "You're being very broad, please, elaborate for me." "I think it's time Naruto was told about the Kyuubi." He doubted he would get sleep tonight. What if Neglected Naruto genetic memory chunin exams? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.